All right, we're recording.
All right. This open meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, and the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the Governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. I hereby call to order the November 4th, 2020 meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee at 7 p.m. I'm Narissa Wallen, Chair of the Triton Regional School Committee, and I would like to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Erin?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Paul Goldner?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Maureen?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Caitlin?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Paulise, I do not see. All right. Linda?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Paul Mayette?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Tina has also not come in. All right. And staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Triton Superintendent Brian Forget.
Here and I can hear you.
Assistant Superintendent Kim Croto.
I'm here and I can hear you.
School Business Administrator Kyle Warren.
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. And Special Education Director Dave McGee.
I'm here and I can hear you.
All right, thank you. For this meeting, the Triton School Committee is convening remotely via Zoom using the information posted on the district's website identifying how the public may join. If you are personally attending by video conference using your device's camera, please be aware that others may be able to see you. Committee members and administrators, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. All supporting materials that have been provided to members of this body are available on the district's website with the agenda posting, unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda. Each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All right. Welcome to the November 4th school committee meeting. I can hardly believe it's November, first of all, but I also can hardly believe that we have not met as a full committee for an entire 2 weeks, which I think is a record at this point. So just real quick, I wanted to, obviously during the time that we've been on hiatus here, the district has gone into hybrid, and there was a tremendous amount of work that went into that, and I wanted to thank everyone that was involved, from the leadership team, all the staff in the schools, and families and students, obviously, that have gone above and beyond to adjust to what was definitely a major change to their schedules and experiences. I also wanted to note that we do have a number of openings in the school district. There's a list of the job postings up on SchoolSpring if you search for Triton Regional, if anyone is interested in coming to work for the district. And with that said, I'm going to open to oral communications from the public. The next item on the agenda is public comment. Members of the public, the meeting host muted you as you entered the meeting. If you would like to address the committee, please indicate now that you would like to do so, either by raising your hand on your video call or using the raise hand option on the participant screen. The meeting host will unmute you so that you can address the committee. Please refer to the public comment policy language on the agenda when making your comments, and remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. When you have finished speaking, the meeting host will mute you again. I'll just quickly read aloud the public comment notice from the agenda. Members of the public may address the committee for up to 3 minutes, longer with permission of the chairperson. The committee will not engage in a discussion on topics raised during public comment, but may choose to add the topic to a future agenda. This agenda segment will be limited to 15 minutes unless extended at the discretion of the chairperson. All right, is there anyone who would like to speak during public comment tonight? I see Jackie Lees. Brian, are you muted?
Yeah.
There we go.
Am I on?
There
You are on.
I'll turn my video on. I'm sorry. Not.
We can hear you.
Okay. I thought I'd turn my video on. I think that's a little bit more comfortable when I'm speaking rather than just my name. My name is Jackie Lees. My son PJ Lees is a senior at Triton, and as many of you know, my husband Paul is a committee member with you. And I wanted to raise a couple issues to the school committee and to Superintendent Forget that I have observed in my own house and PJ's experience with the transition to hybrid. First of all, I want all of you to understand that I think families making the decision to send children to high school or to any school under these set of circumstances makes us choose between our family's health and our kids' education. There's no choice or no real choice, in my opinion, that the hybrid plan presented to get my son educated in the manner that he should be. The fully remote option wasn't an option for our family and many families, as you probably have experienced with the low enrollment statistics. So we decided to send PJ into school. And I think that live streaming should really be seriously investigated and implemented as an approach to supplement what you're doing now. I think that PJ is learning 2 days a week. He has been invited to log into his classes the other 2 days when he's home, and he does do that, but it's a more or less review of the materials that he's learned on the days that he's physically in school. Mondays, when everybody is remote and teachers have those 20-minute segments, it's a colossal waste of effort and time. I don't know how teachers can push out any substantive material in 20 minutes. If you were to do live streaming, and when I say live streaming, I mean that the teachers in school, one cohort's in school, one cohort's at home, but logging in, so it's a fully interactive and immersive experience. The teachers get to teach 5 days a week and push out as much content as they possibly can over 5 days. In my opinion, it fulfills or better fulfills DESE's requirement that the kids are given structured learning time. And I'm not sure why we're not jumping on that bandwagon. I know our neighboring schools are doing it, but I'm not quite sure what the obstacles are here. I also wanted to raise the fact that it appears we've breached our metrics. There are at least 21 cases of COVID among the 3 towns that make up our district. And according to your vote, we were going to switch to fully.
Jackie, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you right there. That's the 3 minutes per speaker. Okay.
I would respectfully request a couple more minutes. I'm just going to wrap up.
You can finish your sentence if you want, but we do have other people waiting to speak.
Okay. I want you all to consider taking a look at today's COVID dashboard put out by the state. The largest number of cases are for children between the ages of 0 and 19. Over the last 2 weeks,
thank you.
700 cases.
The next speaker will be Dave Floodman.
Thanks, Narissa. Good evening. My name is Dave Floodman, and I have a senior at the high school. Now that the box has been checked for getting students back into physical classrooms, I urge the school committee to begin studying how to incorporate the necessary technology that allows students to learn synchronously on the days that they are staying at home. Area schools, including Newburyport, Ipswich, Masconomet, and St. John's, are all doing this successfully, and it is increasing the number of direct instruction hours students receive. Currently, with our model, Triton middle and high school students receive 2 days of in-classroom learning and 2.5 days of asynchronous at home. Now that we've returned our children into the physical classroom, let's start figuring out how we can provide them with the quality education they deserve. In prior meetings, it has been stated that the asynchronous learning portion of the hybrid model is less than ideal. Technology does exist to improve this. I understand a school committee member went to a neighboring school that is doing synchronous learning and took a tour with the principal. Although the school had initial struggles with the technology needed for that synchronous learning, the principal, parents, and students report back now that it is working fabulously. The school committee member was given photographs of minimal equipment needed and an invite to bring back a group of interested staff from Triton to see the setup. I've heard that discussion of this opportunity has not been allowed within school committee meetings. So I ask that all members please reconsider and stay open to possibilities that can improve our students' education. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to speak? Not seeing any hands. All right, just making sure I hit all the screens here. All right, looks like that is it. Okay, so moving on with the consent agenda. I'll read aloud the donation. The Salisbury PTA received a Scholastic News and Storyworks donation for $3,854.82 to be used for a subscription for students to receive a print version copy of their magazine. Can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda, please?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second that motion.
Linda and Maureen. All right, any discussion? All right, I need a roll call vote, please. Erin,
Yes.
thank you. Paul Goldner,
Yes.
thank you. Maureen,
Yes.
thank you. Caitlin,
Yes.
thank you. Linda,
Yes.
thank you. Paul Mayette,
Yes.
and Tina has not joined us yet. I am a yes as well. All right, that will move us on to the student advisory report. Hopefully Kaylee is still there. There she is. I can unmute her.
Sorry, took my
Hi, Kaylee.
sorry about that. All right. If anything could be said about this year, that is one filled with change and overcoming obstacles. At Triton, this narrative has held especially true in the last few months. Well, in the last month especially. With students re-entering the halls, it feels as though life at Triton is beginning to go back to normal. At the same time, it is the furthest it has ever been from that. Everyone is on edge and not quite sure how to return to how things once were. Mix that with incredibly differing opinions on how the current state of the world should be handled, and well, it's an interesting experience. One thing for sure, if one thing is for sure, hybrid feels odd. We are no longer used to seeing one another, walking through the halls, being around that many people, and most definitely not used to being so restricted in day-to-day life. However, that being said, there are three distinct stories of the students that need to be told in this moment. First is the tale of the hybrid students. This group is severely divided in two. There are the students who enjoy it and those who do not. Some feel as though the social interaction aspect that they've returned to brick and mortar for is not being met. While splitting the students in half most certainly was necessary given the current situation, a lot of the students are left isolated and out of contact from those they once communicated with. This group also feels as though the academic needs are not being met. The work rate has slowed. They now receive 2 days as opposed to 5, and they feel as though the remote days no longer meet their needs. They enjoy being able to see their teachers and peers, but they're concerned about the educational aspects. The other half believes that being in person outweighs the downfalls that they've experienced. They're able to focus in person better than they were at home. They love seeing their friends, and while they wish that they would be able to see everyone, they think it's better than not. They wish that everything was a little bit more less restrictive, and remote days aren't what they wish they were. Those two stories are so greatly conflicting in that moment, but they all fall under one category. In this time, they're seeing that some students are incredibly serious about how we're supposed to follow rules. We also have the students who aren't. There's some that like to sit way too close to each other during lunch or during our flex times. The people who wear their masks halfway down. And there's the people that like to point out that sometimes they wish this was enforced a little bit better. Of course, there's nothing that one person can do, and people will always slip through the radar, but they think that it needs to be handled. This was one of the main reasons why we have our third group of students, our students who are currently remote. A lot of them are experiencing technological difficulties in the platform that the district chose. They no longer in contact with the teachers that they once were, and they're adjusting. Everyone within the district is adjusting as best as we can. And we're just hoping that moving forward, we can find the best way to adjust. With all that being said, though, activities are starting to begin and life at Triton has been breathed back, the breath of life has been brought back. Meetings are beginning and homecoming is even being discussed. And we're all looking forward to what will be occurring in the next few months.
Thank you, Kaylee. Any questions for Kaylee? Seeing none from the committee. Thank you, Kaylee. Moving on to new business. Does anyone have new business to raise? All right, seeing none. A monthly report of the superintendent of schools.
Thank you. So I'm going to go through, go through quickly. Some of these are quick updates, others a little more information. Started off today with a reminder to the community, certainly the data that was shown earlier, the figures as far as the daily report and the daily count is certainly trending in the wrong direction. So as we continue to remain in hybrid currently, we've been reminding families that we are partners in this exercise. And clearly the majority of the cases around the country, around the world, schools are remaining open. And the majority of the cases are coming into the schools, not occurring and transmitting within the schools. But regardless, this is something that we as a community need to commit to, making sure that we follow distancing and masking whenever we're in larger groups. So as far as an update on opening in hybrid, we did as of, is it now? Is it our second? Is it our third week? So we're in our second week now of hybrid. It has gone well, I would say, as a general overview. There are certainly challenges. As Kaylee spoke to, those that are coming into the school are finding a very different school. There are those that students who take it very seriously and families who take it very seriously, and those who need routine reminders. So it is, I would say by and large, I'm very pleased with where we are as far as being in our second week in the hybrid model. We are going through the same kind of growing pains that we did with the remote learning model back in mid-September, and growing pains at other districts that shifted to hybrid initially or opened in hybrid or dealt with early in September. So it is a learning curve. It is not perfect. There are technology glitches that have come into play, and I'll speak about that in a second. But by and large, the families that I've spoken with directly certainly spoke to those who have raised concern. But as far as those coming in for the hybrid model and learning within the hybrid model, it has generally been received well. I would say the areas where we continue to hear the most concern is for those students who are learning in the full-time remote academy, and specifically at the high school with the Florida Virtual Learning School. That is certainly, as we've spoken about at great length, that was not the ideal solution. It was what we were able to do given the resources we have. And so as Kaylee mentioned, it's separated. Students are not learning with their own current or previous Triton educators. They do still have connections with Triton educators for content and as well as overall coaching and on the technical piece with Jennifer Jones. So there is certainly connection with Triton educators. Students are still involved in advisory, but it is a very different experience. So we're certainly going to continue to tweak that as best we can to make sure that students stay engaged as much as we possibly can. There are a number of students where electives that weren't offered through Florida Virtual, that those students have been included. Those tend to be very small classes to begin with. So where it was a very small class and there's a couple students who are remoting back in, we have kept those students enrolled in those classes to ensure as much as we possibly can to ensure that no class was lost. The other frustration, and we've spoken about this, is the remote learning days within the hybrid model, basically the Tuesday and Thursday or Wednesday and Friday that students are home. We continue to work through that. The basic model, as we've discussed, is the assumption is that streaming is not the base model being employed. There are equally as many districts who are streaming as those who have chosen not to stream. We are not saying streaming cannot happen, and many teachers are choosing to stream. Kim and I and Kyle have worked and talked through different avenues, working with TEF to allocate funding so that we can begin to provide devices, equipment for those teachers that are exploring the streaming model, whether it's microphones or specialized cameras or extra monitors or wireless microphones, so teachers can be mobile. So beginning to roll that out. A number of teachers are doing a great job with the equipment that we have, Chromebooks and PCs, and certainly going to keep expanding on that and learning and expanding that capacity. So it is a work in progress. Overwhelmingly, I would say the conversations I've had are positive. That doesn't mean I've spoken with everyone and it's an equal split, but certainly the conversations with families who I've spoken with, it has been fairly positive. Teachers, and I think if you speak with teachers, this feels like the first day all over again. Had gotten really comfortable with the remote learning model, and so in going back into this model, it was a big shift. So similarly, it's been a learning curve for teachers to shift back. So my hat's off to them and appreciation for the work in a matter of 6 short weeks, having gone into remote, started in remote and then shifting to hybrid. It is a very different experience. So everyone's committed to continuing to improve on a day-by-day basis, and I'm confident the stories that I hear, I know things are working better today than they were yesterday, and so we'll continue in that format. So are there any specific, I should probably just pause, and are there any specific questions about hybrid and the opening that I can answer at this point as far as the opening goes?
Ask that. Questions from the committee? So, Brian, obviously I have younger kids. I hadn't heard of technical issues with Florida Virtual. Is that extensive or is that isolated to certain individuals? Oh, Kaylee, Brian, do you want to address that? Do you want to have Kaylee jump in here? And
actually, I would love to hear if Kaylee
elaborate
clarity around that. That would be great. And then I'm going to ask Kim to chime in too.
So I don't know the complete full story, but I do know of certain individuals who have been in a already logged in, signed up, working towards their class requirements for online for Florida Virtual, and they got re-enrolled in the class just a few days ago, and they had to fight with the tech department, and they got accused of not doing any of their work and saying that they had, and for one of them that I know, it rebooted today and all of their work came back, but those 72 hours were one of the most stressful times they have had this entire year.
Okay. So I was going to say, because it's my understanding there haven't been any, obviously it's remote and they're not on our network. So this has been glitches with the Florida Virtual platform. So that's what I'm hearing. Okay. Yeah. So, and I know, Jennifer Jones, who as the high school library media specialist is the dedicated person. So similarly, she's gotten up to speed quickly, but I know she's also been doing a lot of troubleshooting and working with kids to fix those kind of glitches where with any online platform, there's certainly going to be glitches where, it disappeared and then got restored. So that's, I don't know, Kim, if you have any other details as far as glitches?
Yeah, I would say it was more about when students were first enrolled and they signed up, there were certainly some issues. And the first day of our students in the Florida Virtual School was also a day that all of the tech support at the virtual Florida school was in a training session. So there weren't a lot of people who were able to help through the help desk process. Since then, I have not heard as technology being the biggest issue at this point. It's really about shifting from a student who was once part of a classroom where they were, guided through work and there were expectations and assignments and due dates, to really it's self-paced, and that's really hard for anybody to do, especially moving from one situation where you had that classroom support to now you're on your own and you have people that are there to check in and support you, but a lot of the onus is on the particular students. So that's, I think, the biggest challenging, and then trying to figure out actually individually what the students need so that we can hopefully create a successful experience. But it certainly is not it's not reflective of a high school experience for sure.
I could just ask a follow-up question on that, Kim. I know that Remote Academy numbers have varied a lot over the past couple of weeks.
Yes.
What is the total number of students who are using Florida Virtual at the high school?
Yeah, so at the Florida, at the high school, the Florida Virtual School, it's probably around 55, I want to say, and that does tend to shift in both directions, actually. At the middle school, it's pretty much stayed consistent, and I would say the other big shift is at the elementary level, where we have one remote class per grade level, and we even have a class right now that's up to, I want to say, 25, 26. So those numbers keep ticking up, and that's becoming kind of a bigger challenge. Just trying to make sure that we're able to provide instruction and even, small group instruction with numbers that large. So that's where we are. So totally, I would say it's about a little over 200 in our remote from K all the way up to 12.
Okay, thank you. Linda?
Has there been any shift where kids have started in the remote and decided to go hybrid because they didn't like the remote?
Yes, at the high school, I would say we see that more often. I think it sounds like a great kind of experience for some kids who may or may not like to go to school. And then they realize how much, again, the onus is on them to, do the work and kind of self-pace themselves, and they miss that social aspect. So they do end up switching and going back. I would say more tend to go back into the hybrid as opposed to the other way.
I just had one other question, Brian. I know that it's been cold. I was wondering how those cold days have worked out with the windows being open on the bus and in the classrooms.
Yeah, so we've had a lot of discussion about windows. And so, our guidance, and actually Kyle, Mr. HVAC, his nickname, Chris Walsh and I are doing I'm going to forget the doctor's name. He's a Harvard business. He's the guy that basically ran and developed those all those metrics and the recommendations around building ventilation. So we're actually doing a webinar on Friday morning. So, there are a lot of schools that have really poor or zero air exchange, and we'll talk about the air exchange. Obviously, we've done a lot of work and we have great air exchange in all of our rooms. So even on this recommendation in the report, windows open is an added benefit, right? As we keep talking about, safety is in the layers. It's masks, it's distancing, it's air quality, it's airflow, so it's all the many things together. It's not any one. So, the latest guidance from DESE speaks more about masking, distancing, cleaning, and that air exchange is certainly important, but it's not like the same as masking or washing hands or cleaning carefully. So the approach we've taken, as our guidelines say, or our plan says, that windows in the classrooms will remain open. except in, I think you use the words extreme weather. Same with the buses. So on these cold days, certainly there were only a couple windows open on the bus, smaller, smaller amounts. And in classrooms, there are days when windows are entirely shut, or on days where, whenever possible, windows are open. But by and large, windows have remained open. But on these colder mornings and colder days, certainly we've had to have some conversations with people to say, I get it, right? We're trying to be very cautious, but when everyone in the classroom has a winter jacket on, we've got to do something about that. So so it has been relaxed. Specifically now we have the readings for all the rooms that we know are 4 or higher, and if they're under 4, there's a complete appropriately sized HEPA filtration unit in there. So we know the air quality is good. So the message has been, when possible, let's keep them open. But if everyone's freezing, certainly, let's bring them back to just a small crack to keep air flowing, not wide open. So there's a cold north wind blowing through the classroom.
Linda, did you have a follow-up? Nope, that was it. So just to clarify, Brian, bus windows are staying open, at least somewhat, right?
Yep. Okay. Yep. So not all of them, right? So when possible, because we keep talking about there is heat in the bus, but it's not like ventilation like a classroom. So certainly windows remain open, but not every window, both sides, all the way down, versus a handful of them.
Right. Yeah.
Based on either side. Yep.
Okay. I just know we have the slightly shorter social distancing on the buses.
Right.
So
Yep.
given the, again, layers of protection, right?
Yep. Yep. And masks required and sanitizing on it. Yep. Absolutely. And I should say, one of the things, we've had lots of discussions about distancing, and, there are those who the goal is to keep 6 feet of distancing at all times. That's just not physically possible at all times. So certainly it's when students are sitting in spaces for extended period of times, that's where we want to make sure the desks are a minimum of 6 feet apart. But there are times in passing, specifically at the high school, we've had this discussion. We would love to think that students you saw the video, right? They're always going to stay 6 feet apart and on alternate sides of the hallway. And certainly well within the staffing that we have, everyone's out and trying to remind students. But there is independence at the high school, right? There's no way around that. And that's a good thing. But as Kaylee mentioned, there are those who believe in masks. There are those that don't. And so we are certainly doing our best to make sure that students are aware of that and being reminded if they're not wearing it or not wearing it appropriately, right? It's not just a chin protector. So that remains a work in progress. And so we continue vigilance on that. But certainly at the elementary, it's a very different situation where where students are walked everywhere that they go and in classes. And that's another piece I wanted to mention. Erin, did you have a question?
I did. So you just mentioned a couple of things and it made me think, do you have a spot where the students can actually go, or the faculty can go to take a look at what the requirements are and they can be directed back to? So if someone is continuously not following a requirement, that you have it documented somewhere that this is what the requirement is, this is what you're expected to be following. And then is it consistent across all of the buildings or all of the schools, that different levels, to make sure that there is some consistency and some way to enforce it?
In regards to general safety practices?
Well, you were just saying, like, walking through the hall, the keeping distance, making sure, that sort of thing, putting your mask over your nose and mouth, I know is in that policy, but where are the kids directed, or the faculty directed, to go and take a look at a compilation of all these additional rules or requirements that they need to follow?
So obviously we have the plan, and then each school has interpreted. I mean, there are signage, there are staff manuals and documentation that they've created that put that into practice, but it's mostly a daily and routine reminder as far as the expectations. Masks isn't a good example, because it's always on, right? If you are unless you're on a mask break or you're eating, your mask is on your face unless you're alone in a room. So that's a fairly straightforward. And then in the hallways, everyone's aware of the expectations. And it's now a matter of reminding folks when there's 650 kids at the high school, roughly half of them, slightly more than half of them, depending on the day. It's a matter of continually reminding rather than anyone not being aware of what the expectation is.
Does that answer your question, Aaron?
Yes and no, because I'm also curious, like whether or not all of the teachers fully understand what's going on too, so that they're enforcing it the right way too. So.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that, and to say if that may not be the case, and I can certainly circle back with the principals. So there's a lot of communication that obviously comes out from me, and then at this, kind of goes in phases, and then it shifted a lot to the principals sharing information out with faculty and families. It was Brian overload, as I was explained to me. So people got sick of listening to me, and now it was listening to principals. And so I can certainly circle back. I don't know if there's specific examples where you feel like some students or staff may not be aware, and we can talk about that offline or here, but I'll certainly circle back with the principals to make sure that they're confirming if there's any lack of information.
Right, because it could be confusing to the students if one teacher's allowing something and a different teacher's allowing something different because there's a different interpretation of it instead of being a united front. So that would be challenging.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I can circle back with principals on that.
Caitlin?
Sorry, I couldn't see the button. Who is in charge of monitoring the bus? NRT? So the bus driver who's driving is in charge of monitoring behind them. How's that working?
There was one incident where a picture was shared with me of a student not wearing a mask. That's the only incident I've heard about directly. I think by and large, students are taking it seriously. The buses is always a point of contention because especially the little kids right up through about 3rd, 4th grade with those tall seats that they put into place, I don't know how many years ago, it basically looks like the bus is empty until about the 3rd grade section. Obviously it's different this year in that it's not by grade, it's by order of getting onto the bus. So I don't know, Kyle, if you heard anything directly, but I have not heard anything, a concern about students not wearing masks other than, a case here and there.
Correct. I haven't heard any either. And I talk to the bus company daily too, so.
Multiple times per day.
Yeah.
And I would say, encourage you all, families, anyone, if there's a concern that anyone sees, certainly bring it to Kyle's attention or my attention.
Absolutely.
We'll absolutely address it. Yeah.
All set, Caitlin?
Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions? So Brian, I just had one. Have there been, I know we specifically put some guidance, or I should say language in the policy in regard to if there were students who were by choice were struggling with actually wearing their masks according to the policy, that they could be moved into the remote model. Do you know if there had to be any of those conversations, or if there have been any students that have been moved to remote because of that?
To my knowledge, there have not been any students who have it's gone that far where it's gotten to the point of forcing them to remote. There have absolutely been conversations, some very pointed, some very students very disinterested in wearing them. But ultimately, I've asked the principals to let me know, certainly if there's any cases that arrive to that where we're enforcing a policy and at that point, we're excluding a student from school, and none of them have been brought to my attention. So I certainly have had conversations about varied. Sometimes there are families that believe strongly that it shouldn't be required, or individual students. But I have not been made aware of any that have gotten to that point.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the superintendent before we move on? All right, next section of the superintendent's report.
So continuing through, as I said, a lot of this is updates on information, just documenting what we hadn't previously shown, or I hadn't shown in writing. So kindergarten, that did also switch with the shift to hybrid. Students are remote on Monday mornings, as all students are remote, synchronous for about an hour, hour and a half. And then students finish a largely asynchronous morning, some activities. And then students are Tuesday through Friday, it's half-day program. And there's an AM, basically an AM cohort and a PM cohort. So each class is split roughly-ish in half. Students coming in the AM and the PM, allowing for that 6-foot distancing to be maintained, similar to the way we're cohorting. So I have not had a lot of conversations with parents about kindergarten, but those that I have spoken with have been very pleased. I know the kindergarten teachers are thrilled because clearly preschool and kindergarten specifically is very challenging to teach students remotely when we're talking about basic things like letters and gripping a pencil. And so it's been very well received from my understanding. Certainly if you've heard anything otherwise, please let us know. But parents have been thrilled to have students in person for the primary as the primary mode of teaching. Technology updates mentioned here, challenges with connecting devices and Wi-Fi. As you know, close to 1,000 Chromebooks that we're still awaiting. I don't have an updated date. Still now expecting, hopefully sometime get a word over this week that it would likely be next week or the following week where we would have those devices in hand and ready to roll out. So there are a lot of students who are still bringing their own device. That has been fairly challenging. Students who brought a personal Chromebook, and I don't know if you know, a PC or a Mac, you connect to Wi-Fi, you see that, you enter the password and you're good to go. On a Chromebook, you can have all kinds of extra settings. And so there was significant challenges at the high school and middle school specifically, with passwords having been reset. And so once passwords expire, any district passwords, you have to reset it on a PC. And that pushes out to the entire network, Google Suite and all that. So there was a lot of issues with reset passwords, then also device connectivity, and then some spaces where the connectivity, the auditorium, where there were large groups gathering. The design of the system, there can be 500 devices connected in the auditorium without limiting the bandwidth. There were not 500 people in the auditorium, and there were challenges. So the tech department is continuing to work through that. And address that. It's been getting better. The big, huge chunk of connecting devices, specifically personal devices, got over that hurdle. Still issues here and there. Again, reinforcing the decision that if having a district device designed to work on the network is the best way to go, so we get rid of these technology challenges. So still a work in process. We actually did hire on a contract basis, committed for several weeks for an additional technical support person to work with the tech department, just to provide added support through those COVID funds, just hopefully get us over the hurdle. Certainly going to keep that person on at least through all those devices coming online and being handed out to make sure that we're over that hurdle. And then long term, I think we're certainly in a place that as we look to the future, that we're going to continue to need at least the same amount of support, if not more support. Overall, the network is in great shape. There are certainly lags, right? Any internet service is going to have lags from time to time. We have a business class dedicated fiber service that we've had for a few years. So there shouldn't be significant lags, but there are occasional lags. It also depends on your connection and the town. And so there are lags from time to time, but by and large, people aren't getting kicked off left and right. People are staying connected. I haven't heard, again, I've had a couple weeks ago, last week specifically, lots of connectivity issues, and then even in remote with challenges from within the building. But the tech department has slowly but surely chipped away at those. And I believe we're in a pretty good place right now. Long term, we are working to have an overall network review just to see and make sure that there aren't things that we could be doing differently to make it even better. So still a work in progress, but no issues to my understanding or knowledge where things are just getting shut down, where people are getting kicked off routinely. And there are quite a few teachers who are live streaming with students within the classroom. So there's certainly, we're certainly testing our bandwidth for sure. The wind and brass instruments, nothing new there. That's just, Doc, Maureen, did you have a question?
Sorry, can I just ask before you move forward? Brian, you talked about hiring an additional, I think you said part-time staff person for technology.
Yep.
So I'm just curious, do you see any immediate financial needs in terms of like equipment or something in order to improve the bandwidth in the auditorium? Or, I mean, I know that, I mean, I have a high school junior and the juniors are using the auditorium for their flex time.
Mhm.
And last week, I don't think many of them were able to get online during that time in the auditorium to do schoolwork. So I'm just wondering, is there any immediate costs that you see that we need to make some improvements?
So the first cost is assessing and figuring out, and they are chipping away at the auditorium specifically.
Mhm.
But as you know, overall, the staffing that we added was not a permanent. We just did it through literally a temp agency. So added a contract person and committed to a handful of weeks. I think it was 6-8 weeks. So that's rather than long term committing to long term employees. So that was a mitigating the kind of the day-to-day triaging of issues. And then the Wi-Fi access it's a network issue. So that's not just a technical, it's not the wireless access points. It's an overall network connectivity and traffic issue. So was actually talking with Deb Jones and Brett Buckus in regards to getting an outside contractor in to do that assessment. Unfortunately, a lot of these contracting the companies, they look to be under contract with you. So how about you contract with us? We manage the network, and it's just for 150,000, we'll make sure everything's perfect. So trying to find the right one that understands our equipment. It's a Sophos environment. So working through that to identify the person who could come in, and it's not cheap, but it's not a $100,000 solution to mitigate that specific issue, which is, the belief is it's connected to a larger technology network.
Hold that, Maureen. Yeah. Kaylee?
Off of what Maureen had just brought up, is there any reason why the auditorium hadn't been addressed over the summer? I know it's something that the arts department has brought up for the last few years, so just wondering why that wasn't acknowledged as an area of concern beforehand.
It was in all the testing. It was testing through okay, and then at when all the devices started connecting to it, there was a new challenge. So my understanding is that the issue that had been happening in the past, a lot of it has to do with visitor connecting through the visitor network versus connecting through Triton staff or Triton student. So any device, whether it's my personal device or a district device, I connect through Triton staff, and that layers on Triton credentials and protections, and then a student does through, Kaylee, whether it's your own device or a district device, you would log in through this Triton student. So my understanding it was an old issue, and this is a new issue. I don't have any technical answer to tell you beyond that.
In your free time, you're going to go earn a IT degree, right? Yeah.
Please no.
All right. Any other questions? Erin?
Can I rewind a little bit about a comment you made earlier? Just I didn't catch you. You mentioned all kids are remote on Monday. Is that across the board? Everyone's remote now that we're in this model?
Except for high priority learners, everyone is remote. Yes. So
Okay.
remote Mondays is a remote day for everyone. Tuesday, Thursday, cohort A is in. Wednesday, Friday, cohort B is in.
Yeah.
And since everyone is remote on Mondays, it's a largely synchronous remote day, similar to the way we were when we were in fully remote.
Okay. So all of the high priority learners, are they on like A/B schedule like everyone else, or do we still have high priority learners that are identified that are not on the A/B?
So they are in a cohort, but they are in every day.
Okay.
So and again, some have ebbed and flowed, right? There've been some new priority students added, or students who are no longer a high priority student. But high priority students are in even on Mondays until 12:15 or 12:30, middle school, high school, and then elementary, and then they shift home, and then full days Tuesday through Friday.
So what do they do on the day that their cohort's not in the particular class?
Largely in the classroom with their cohort. So they're in the classroom with both cohorts. That makes
So
sense.
they're a crossover student, like they cross into both cohorts and
Yep.
getting the same lesson twice?
Not necessarily. It depends on the makeup of the classroom. So if and I don't know, Kim, if you want to jump in, if that was going to be the case, we have alternative arrangements for those students, so they're not sitting there hearing the same thing twice.
Thanks.
Any other questions? All right, seeing none.
All right, so wind and brass, nothing new there, other than I think I reported that to you 2 weeks ago that the guidance was changed. So with a instrument mask, I think you call it, a musician's mask and bell covers on those instruments, they can be used indoors at 10 feet distanced. So we have shifted to accommodate with that. On page 4, the Binax Now rapid testing. You've heard this referred to at the federal level, my understanding is it's being rolled out and managed through the military, but this is a rapid test that can be administered. It can be implemented several different ways. In essence, Massachusetts is rolling this out for schools, prioritizing symptomatic individuals. So not as a means of like a pooled saliva test with a follow-up PCR, but this is a 15-minute rapid response test. They are providing them to schools who partner with them, and it's only allowing to give them to students and staff that are symptomatic. The challenge becomes, even if you test positive, so whether the test comes back quickly positive or negative, the recommendation is that we're still sending the student or staff member home to get a full PCR test. That, along with the added requirements, there are waivers that are required. They listed the CLIA waiver is required, the testing or the training for the nurses, and even just the added fact of these tests become a new, it's a bio waste, right? It's a biomedical waste, which has its whole other set of requirements as far as disposal. So in talking with the nurses, the thought behind it is to change behavior, right? If we know right away, we'll change behavior. If we've already identified, and I think families have seen, I didn't include it in here, but the nurses sent out yesterday or today, depending on the school, kind of an updated, if you have any of these symptoms, right? These kind of weird, you lost your sense of smell, or any of those kind of, well-known single symptoms, please stay home and get tested. If you have 2 or more of these other kind of common symptoms, a stomach ache, a sore throat, please go get tested. So, with all of this recommendation, adding, if we're saying we're gonna take these actions and these steps, if you have these symptoms, it didn't seem like a benefit to be able to add this test with all the complications of it if we're still going to take the action and send the student or staff member home. So in speaking with the nurses and several other districts I was speaking with on a conference call with DPH and Dr. Maddow and the whole crew, several districts that had said let's give it a shot, and now said no, it's just, let's not be phase 1. Let's see how this goes, because we just didn't see the value add. So we are not moving forward in implementing that right away. As far as other testing, I am still waiting to hear back from Anna Jakes. They're working, I think I mentioned to you, on a potential partnership with Newburyport, Triton, Amesbury, and the Governor's Academy that would allow us to have quicker access to testing for students and staff. There aren't details completely confirmed yet, but my understanding is that's still a work in progress. Nothing that can be confirmed as of yet. I think I should pause.
Linda?
Yeah, Brian, that's the area that I have concern with, because I had to get tested a few weeks ago because there was a positive case where I was. And I got orders from my doctor to go to Anna Jakes. And I wound up going to Lawrence, and I still haven't heard from Anna Jakes to go get tested. So I'm just hoping that the turnaround for people to get tested is much quicker than that.
Yeah, so my understanding is if you have a doctor's order, you drive over to the tent at Anna Jake's and it's not,
They have to call you and tell you when your appointment is.
oh, did they change that? Okay. So it's through the intakes department.
Right, so my doctor sent the order over and then I had to wait for Anna Jakes to call me to tell me when my appointment was. And I'm still waiting.
Interesting.
If I would have recalled my doctor, but I wound up just going to Lawrence because I needed to know as soon as possible. So I'm just hoping that
All right.
we get clarification of the testing that's done over there.
I will check on that. I had not heard that.
Caitlin?
And Tim got tested last week through Anna Jake 2 weeks ago, and it was fast. I needed to get tested and my doctor's orders went in last week. And I had to call the doctor again today to get an appointment to go get tested. And their first available was Friday. So that's like an 8 or 9 day turnaround just for the test.
Wow.
And that's an Anna Jake's doctor to Anna Jake's testing facility. And it required multiple phone calls just to get a phone call to me.
All right.
So I'm a little concerned because it's not as quick and it's declined in the past few weeks too. So I'm a little concerned, and their response is they're really swamped, which is understandable, but it does make it harder for our staff and students to get tested in a timely manner.
And that might explain why I haven't heard back yet. Starts my conversations with Gary.
Yeah.
They're still working on it, and they probably are still working on it. But if they're that swamped, that gives me a data point. Thank you.
So I can say too that I, after, because Caitlin had brought this to my attention before, I checked the Quest because that's who they process through. Quest is still showing under 2 days. So either they're not updating their turnaround times quickly, or it's an Anna Jake specific issue. I don't know which, but one of the things we can do, which I've done in the past, is put a call into Convenient MD, which is the other local place that will test minors, and see what their turnaround time is now.
They said that a test on Friday, they would guarantee it to a doctor on Monday, but they had to code my test as a procedure so that it would be rushed. So I don't know if they changed it.
Okay.
So I can let you know if it actually does come back from
Yeah.
Friday to Monday.
Yeah. All
The
that
way
information is helpful.
The way they had to code it was wonky. It wasn't like the normal way.
I have people randomly Facebook message me when they've gone to get tested because they know that I'm watching this now. So
so I'll join your spreadsheet, Narissa.
Yes. That'd be great. Paul Goldner.
I was just going to say a couple weeks ago, I had to get a test. I went to Convenient MD and it took 15 minutes. So, but that was a couple weeks ago and it was a Sunday evening when I found out. So.
Thank you. Any other comment on that? Erin?
Narissa, just the comments that you just made sparked my interest. Can you tell me the information that you're getting on the turnaround is from Quest itself, and it's based on the testing results? So it's not actually the administration of the test, it's the results from the time it actually gets taken to when it comes back.
Yeah, my understanding is that they provide 2 different turnaround estimates, I guess you could say. There's one that's an urgent and one that's a general population. So the general population one is the one I always look at it, and it's from the time that they pick up the tests to the time that they enter the test result data into the system, because it's all electronic on that end. So essentially,
but that's not accounting how long it takes you to get the appointment to get the test.
Nope.
So
Correct.
Okay, so when we had the metrics before, were we using the Quest data, or are we using the full amount of time that it takes to get a test and then get the results?
Correct. We were using the Anna Jake's time.
Okay,
So that was literally, you know, you go get tested at Anna Jake's and then the results hit the system. it's
so
that-
it wasn't how long it took them to get the appointment at Anna Jake's either. It was just the amount of time it took them to get get the swab from Anna Jake's to Quest.
So my understanding is that that can vary based on whether you have a doctor's referral in, or if you're using their, I think they call it the access line, to actually have almost a live referral right during that process. So that's a really hard thing, I think, to estimate on what that turnaround time is. Because so my understanding is with this access line, it's literally like I call up and I say, I have these symptoms, I need to get tested. They say, do you have a primary care? I say, no, I don't have a primary care. They say, can you tell me your symptoms? Yes, here's, you know, my list of symptoms that I've had. Okay, you're set up for whatever time, 8 o'clock. But there would be a difference then if I went to my primary care, got referred into Anna Jake's with a doctor's note, and then had to set up my appointment from there, like had to have Anna Jake's call out.
So if you say you don't have a doctor and you don't get a referral, you get a test immediately, but if you have a doctor and a referral, you don't get one the same day?
I don't know.
Okay,
I'm
sorry,
varies.
I'm asking a lot of questions because my mind's blown right now about using a metric from taking a swab from Anna Jake's to get the result versus how much time it actually takes to get the appointment to get the test.
So it could be quick to get the appointment to get the test. It may not be fast. It depends on how it's getting there, right? Just like anything else when you go through a hospital to get it. Sometimes it's a very fast process to get a referral and sometimes it's not.
Okay.
Caitlin?
So to Erin's point, when I called a couple weeks ago to get my husband a test, I called their access line and they said that they were not, that it had to go through the doctor's referral. So I actually sent my husband to Epping.
Because you had a doctor, right? Because you have.
No, they didn't even ask. They just said, we need a referral. And so could you get one? And I said, well, yes, but why? I would like, he has symptoms, like we need to go now or whatever. And she said, it needs to go through like your primary care. And then she gave me the steps of what to say to his primary care. Well, she told me to have him call, obviously, but to go through the primary care to get it. So it actually became easier to make an appointment at Epping.
So my understanding.
Have the test there than it did to go through Anna Jake's, because the time just to get the appointment would be longer than if you went elsewhere.
Gotcha.
So I don't know if I don't know if that's part of their issue too.
Yeah, I don't know if things have changed. They hadn't, as far as I knew, but my understanding was if you had a primary care, you'd be directed back to your primary care. If you didn't have a primary care, then they'd handle you through that line in the past.
I don't know. I guess you'd almost have to call and say that you don't have a primary care and see what they say.
And
which is not
a
good idea.
Past, like you have to do that 3 times because sometimes you call and you get different answers depending on who you talk to. And then that's true for everywhere. I mean, I think they're trying to do their testing, right? But their training, but things change so fast that.
Yeah. So I don't know if it's a clear path anymore.
Okay. So I think Brian and I can hopefully go back and see if we can get some answers on that. Some of that may just be making some phone calls and some of it may be hopefully tapping into our contacts at Anna Jake's.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, we don't have any special powers to get answers. I mean, unfortunately we have the same, right? I mean, we can do our due diligence and dig, and hopefully we can use our connections, but I think it's like many other things. You know, I've called the state epidemiology hotline department, whatever the right term is there. And depending on the day and the hour, you get different responses. So I think that it remains a fluid and not concrete, unfortunately. So.
We'll dig.
But we'll
see
certainly.
where we're at on that.
Yeah.
Any other questions on that before Brian moves on? Seeing none.
Right, so a quick couple more. We talked about personnel challenges. Those continue. I actually talked to a Kelly Services, which is a staffing agency today, to see if there's anything they can do to help us out. Primarily right now, it's instructional assistants that we have openings for. Several of the individuals who had explored not coming back because of medical reasons actually chose to return. So I believe on the list, it's about 15 individuals who are currently stepping away from their role. The majority of those we already had on the list and we had already prepared for. So Kyle and I are in the process of documenting all of this to make sure that we have every single accommodation or FFCRA or FMLA leave to make sure that we've got everything accounted for. And so working through that. SIMS reporting, actually, since I wrote this, we did certify our totals. So we are 178 students less than we were, I'm sorry, 176 from the end of last year. So 176 students less than we were. That is a foundation count. So ultimately, you know, the direct cost to the district from a Chapter 70 perspective, because we are spending so far beyond foundation, we only get minimum aid, like the vast majority of districts in the state. So if that's $20 per pupil, you know, it's $3,200, $3,400 that we ultimately would get hit for through Chapter 70 for next year. The bigger concern is students who enrolled in other districts via choice or charter. We still don't have those numbers confirmed. Kyle's adjusted the budget based on the cherry sheet, which is projections, but those are not confirmed numbers. So the same process we're doing using October 1's numbers, every other district is doing, claiming, you know, I have your Triton student, I have your Ipswich student. So that process from across the state is continuing, and we usually know by mid-December our updated charter and choice enrollments. So of note, TECA, which is the Tech Connections Academy, that does get billed through school choice. School choice is $5,000 per student. TECA is more like $9,000 per student. So somehow there's a special rate for TECA, but for every student that did enroll in TECA, we would be billed $9,000, and that is roughly $9,000, and that is for the current year. So those are current year projections that will continue to adjust. Snow days, I think I reported this to you verbally last month, and so I'm putting some communication together for families and staff just to confirm that we can use a remote learning day. If it's a snow day and electricity is on and by and large we're functional, we could still have a remote learning day with a largely synchronous remote learning day and consider that a school day rather than a snow day. So I'm going to put some documentation together to share with everyone so that everyone knows what to expect. But that doesn't mean there will never be a snow day. If there is bad weather and half the town's power is out, or, you know, a lot of power outages, or, you know, depending on how the winter goes and maybe it just gets really busy and we just need a good old fashioned snow day to get kids outside and dig some holes and make some snowmen, then I'm not going to be shy about just calling an old fashioned snow day as well. So just to let you know that that is a tool in the tool chest this year that the commissioner has approved. The transition periods is a new, and I'm actually going to put this as ask Narissa to put on the agenda as an action item. So when we originally wrote our plan, the Department of Ed used the term a reasonable period of time for families to shift between remote and or fully remote, called the Remote Academy, and whatever model we're in, full in person or hybrid. That hadn't really ever been codified. People talked about it as 2 to 3 weeks verbally. It eventually got written down somewhere by DESE, not in any formal guidance, as 3 to 4 weeks. There's been a lot of discussions across the state, nothing unique to Triton, that forget who asked the question, and Kim reported, you know, we've got some elementary class sizes growing into the mid-20s. So shifting a student, continuing to just shift students into those classes becomes a challenge. So the recommendation is Department of Ed has updated its guidance that the reasonable time frame to allow parents to make a shift from fully remote, from the Remote Academy into the hybrid model or from the hybrid model into the fully remote, their updated guidance is between 4 and 6 weeks. So similar to what we were doing when we were talking about the, it was explained as 2 to 3, not in writing. Taking the low end of that range, and I'm going to propose to you that we adjust our expectation that it's a 4-week turnaround. In many cases, we will likely be able to do it sooner. We've talked about the last week and this week, even at the high school with the Florida virtual, treating it like an add drop period. So we can certainly very easily welcome kids back into the high school classes after a week or two. 4 months down the road, they're going to be at a very different place as far as the pacing with the independence of Florida virtual. Even in the remote sections for elementary, it's going to be slightly different pacing. So that's not to say it will always be 4 weeks, but because of our resources, the reality and the structure that we have in place, and everyone has in place with the circumstances, I'm recommending that we adjust our assumption for parents so that we communicate that it could take upwards of 4 weeks for us to be able to transition you, if you're currently hybrid, into the remote option, or if you're in the remote option, to shift you back into hybrid. So again, it's not, I don't know how to explain this other than to say, it's not what we want to do. It is not what is ultimately the best thing for anyone, teachers, students, or otherwise. It's just a matter of if class sizes are getting to this point, it's not just simply adding another student. It might mean, is it collapsing another section? Is it adding a staff member? It's not as simple as just simply adding a student to a class and assuming we're okay. So I will, to the action items, I will be asking you to change that, and we can certainly talk about that now or at that point. The last 2 stadium repairs, nothing new to report to you there. As of today, they had to change paving contractors, so looking to get it all buttoned up the week of Thanksgiving. And then that project will be done all except for the coating, the track surfacing, which would be done first thing in the spring. Grab and Go Meals program, I reported to you in writing last month that it had been approved through December 31st. I think I told you verbally that it was extended through the balance of the year, but just documenting here that meals program is through June 30th of 21. So for the balance of this entire year, all meals for children under the age of 18 will be free and reimbursable. And also to clarify, if we're delivering meals on Monday and students are in person on Tuesday and Wednesday, or Tuesday, Thursday, Wednesday, Friday for their cohort days, they do not need to bring those meals. They can actually get additional meals, and those are still continually free and continue to be free and reimbursable. So those other meals can be used at other times. So as long as they're being provided for a student or a child under the age of 18, they are completely federally reimbursable. So one last thing I wanted to add, it wasn't written here. We talked last month about moving the committee meetings into full in person. So Bob Lathrop and I spent some time earlier this week, had Maureen and Sandy zooming in down in the library to test it out to see how it works. There's a lot of technical details so that those meeting participants who aren't comfortable meeting in person could be meeting via Zoom. Those images would be up on the 2 large screens down there. Everyone else would be in the room facing those screens. So a lot of technical details to get the audio from Zoom out into the room, and then the room back into the Zoom connection cleanly, and not just using speakers and microphones. So Bob's figured out all the technical details. I will tell you the greatest challenge right now is if the full committee was there, 9 plus Kaylee, that makes 10 for central office administrators, that's 14 individuals. That 14 individuals spaced out around that room down there is literally that whole area where we sit, where it's the committee sits, and then there's the audience back up to where Bob is, and then the VTV students are up against the computer lab. It's literally a horseshoe that encompasses that entire space facing the screens. So I had a discussion with Narissa today, and I don't know if that's a discussion for this evening or otherwise. We can continue to work through the technical details, but it is going to be a very different meeting experience with utilizing that space in that way, because quite literally, the people who are in that room are going to be speaking to one another from across the entirety of that space. Again, microphones on, speakers on, so it's not going to be an issue of hearing, but it is not going to be a very typical meeting experience. So I think it comes down to a balance of the purpose. I know the discussion was to not be hypocrites, right? If we're requiring staff and students to be in school, meetings should be in person as well. As a concept, I like that, but I just think you have to think through the concept of the quality of the meetings and what you're able to do in the time that you're allotted. And does it actually diminish the experience of the overall effectiveness of the meeting? And does that benefit out, or does that outweigh the benefits of meeting in person? So just wanted to give you that report as well. We're actually scheduled to a couple more technical details to work through those tomorrow. So happy to answer
Any questions or comments or thoughts on the last item? Tina?
I will just say, in terms of trying to meet in person and understanding both sides in terms of the technical issues and effectiveness of the meetings, I think it's worth trying. I think if our next meeting we're still in hybrid, I hope, and there are teachers and students in person, I think we should try. So I'm just giving my endorsement for that.
So just to be clear, and I think I'm not out of line in saying this, we wouldn't run a meeting at it first. We would run like a test, like let's just throw some people on, no deliberation, let's see how it works, kind of from all experiences, because I think there are also bigger concerns about what happens when everyone in that room is wearing a mask. How, does that impair sound? Are you still able to understand what everyone's hearing? Like, I think there are some, so part of it's technical, but part of it's the experience. And I think we need to have that experience. And I do not want to do that as part of a live meeting, because if it goes south, we don't want to do it when we're actually in a meeting.
I think that makes sense. So if there's further testing, or if you need committee members to come in and test, I'll come in. Just let me know.
Yeah. Great.
I would say the next thing is, certainly we can make sure tomorrow morning, Bob and I can make sure that everything we thought really is buttoned up and works. And then I would say as many of you as possible to do whatever the time is, and it can be 20 minutes, it doesn't need to be long, but just so that you can all experience what it will be like to be in the room. Some of you will know right away that you won't feel comfortable and can't be in the room. And so then you'd be doing the Zoom experience. So I just think if that's the case, that would be the next step, is to schedule that however you see fit, Narissa, scheduling that trial.
Yeah, I think if we can, I hate to do this to you and Bob, but if we could do an evening, because I know that's when most people are free, so that we could actually simulate what a real meeting looks like, that would be my preference. Okay, any other thoughts or questions for the superintendent on anything that was in his report? All right, seeing none. Moving on to the draft family survey.
Okay, so this survey, you have this lots of discussion about this. So the hope was to make this as short a survey as possible, but also as meaningful as possible. So there's been a couple tweaks even since I printed this. There's a note at the top, and I kind of called that note out about, this is not about rewriting the models. We're not changing the Florida virtual. We're not saying if no one likes the Florida virtual that we're going to be able to say, voila, we've come up with the perfect solution. This is about making tweaks and adjustments to the models that we have within the confines of the resources and the staffing that we have. So I don't need to read through the questions, but I originally drafted it as a single survey and asked people to select which model they were in. I think ultimately ended up being more confusing. So I think it makes sense now to just say, if you're in the virtual academy, please fill out this survey. If you're in the hybrid model, please fill out this survey. So I would love any thoughts, feedback, things that are missing, things you would like to see taken out. The plan is to use this to actually then develop a staff survey that obviously would not be for public consumption, but to get staff feedback, and then actually talk with Patrick and working with the student council to develop a student version, to also survey the high school students, absolutely. And we were talking about surveying middle school students as well. One of the caveats I will say, anytime we have a survey, excuse me, it's always good to ask for or provide open-ended questions, right? There's always questions that we didn't think to ask that, and there's feedback that someone wants to give. By and large, when we get open response questions, we can actually limit, so it's not, you know, an entire thesis, but, you know, a short little blurb from people. You know, we can put a note in there about please don't use teachers' names or your child's names, because obviously then that information needs to be redacted. So more often than not, we've historically ended up not publicly sharing the comments, simply because there are just so many references to specific staff members or people with their names or their kids' names, and it's just not appropriate to share that publicly. So certainly the thinking would be, if it ends up being clean, great, we'll just put it out there. But if it follows historical patterns, it would likely be that we would have to kind of pull out the themes from the comments and share those with you, rather than just sharing the blanket comments. So yeah, any feedback that you have about the survey? And again, I should just say that the plan is to put this out to families on Monday the 16th, and then have it due the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. So it's roughly a week and 2 days. And it's surveying after we've been within this model, operating in this model for 3 full weeks. So a week and a half now, another week and a half, and then survey. So hopefully people are able to see the model with some of the kinks worked out.
Maureen?
Brian, what's the time frame for surveying the staff and the high school students? Is that something that's already being worked on, or you're just thinking of doing it?
Nope. So the same time frame. The thought was use these, get your feedback on these surveys, and then use these as the basis for developing those. Obviously, the angle will be slightly different. So then it would be based on these questions. If you think these are good questions or have other suggestions for questions to ask, kind of use that. And again, for the students, it would be Patrick taking it to the student council. So we'd be prepared to do it in roughly the same time frame.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
Sure.
Other questions or comments on the survey? Paul Mayette? I'll come to you in a second, Aaron.
I'm just wondering, and I don't know if this becomes too complicated, but is there any value in trying to, on the fully remote survey, is there any value in trying to get data as to whether the students are working with teachers at another school? Or does that become, I feel like that could change if they started at NES and were now working with a SES teacher, that might change their experience. But from a survey standpoint, I can also see that getting really complicated really quickly. So I just thought I'd put it out there and see if.
So you're saying being able to identify a respondent and whether their student was a Salisbury student and now they're working in remote, and it happens to be, what was it, I'm thinking Williamson, Kelly Williamson from 2nd grade at Newbury. So Kelly was a Newbury teacher and they were Salisbury. So being able to identify that.
Yeah, it just seems to me that the community, the change in community aspect might play a role in that experience, that there might be value in us knowing something about that. I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah, I guess I would say.
I think the only grade you can't do that for is 2nd grade.
Yeah.
Right now.
I think that would actually work both ways though too. So if somebody in hybrid had to switch teachers too, that might also alter their responses. And I think that's a really good idea, Paul.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we can, if someone says they're Newbury Elementary and grade 3, there's only one grade 3 remote teacher. And so then we could know right away, right? We can disaggregate that data based on the classes, but it is anonymous. And you're right, 2nd grade, there are 2. So it might be better to potentially ask that question. I don't know how we would, I'll take that away as I get the concept. I think it's an interesting data point, because you're right, Aaron, I think it would change the way you'd respond, right? It's a very.
In both instances, whether you're hybrid or remote.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what Aaron's saying is, let's say that you were, again, to use second grade at Newbury Elementary, right? That second grade at Newbury Elementary, those students who remained in hybrid, who had been in that class, now have been moved to other classes. So those students are going to be in the hybrid survey. And, you know, they should be identified there as much as the remote students who switch teachers, remote academy students who switch teachers should be identified.
Mhm.
Are you saying that's bad, Narissa? Or I'm trying to understand
I
what
was
you're.
just trying to explain it because I wasn't
Okay.
sure.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it could be as simple as a question. Did you change classes with the model changed on October 27th?
Yeah, and it doesn't have to go any further. Yeah.
That would get to your question, Aaron. I don't know that it would necessarily get to Paul's question. But I
But
think,
if they changed teachers, you know, and they're staying remote, then you know that they're one of the kids that had to swap, and it still might have an effect on how they're responding.
Mhm.
If that, am I getting that correct, Paul, for you?
I think Paul's question was more in regard, similar, but even with different schools, right? So
Okay.
the Newbury ethos, the Pine Grove ethos, the Salisbury ethos, kind of
Okay.
is it, but I think they're both important. I think we mostly, except for second grade, can tease out without even asking any questions, answer Paul's question. And then adding a secondary question, as I was just saying, gets to your point, Aaron. So I think it's an interesting question.
And even for second grade, you can answer it for most of them because there's one Pine Grove teacher and one Newbury Elementary teacher. So the Salisbury Elementary students were the only students that you wouldn't be able to immediately identify in second grade, I believe. From what
Well,
I
there's a
saw.
lot of, well, on the remote side, but there's a lot of Salisbury teachers in general. So I think that would still be difficult.
Right, but if let's say it's looking at Salisbury teachers, let's say it's you know, the student indicates that it's sixth grade and they're from Pine Grove, you know that teacher was from Salisbury Elementary, so you immediately know that any students who had self-identified as Pine Grove or Salisbury Elementary definitely switched. Does that make
Right.
sense? Yeah.
Right, but you wouldn't know if it was the school.
Oh,
that
within Salisbury, right,
Right.
whether they were originally in the class or not.
Yep.
Caitlin?
Yeah, no, I agree with Paul because I think looking specifically at second grade, they didn't just change teachers, a lot of them changed schools, technically speaking, because that teacher is now teaching from a different principal's perspective. And so those small shifts would make a kind of a big difference, either positively or negatively, in how your child's doing, whether they thrived at their original school and they're having trouble making that shift, or if they're the opposite and are loving the shift, I think would be good to know too. Just because those teachers, and you know, it helps them all to talk and get together. But the other question I have, when we're ready to move on from Paul's.
Still on survey?
Yeah.
Okay. I think we're good to move on. Anybody else have any follow-up on that? Okay, moving on.
Is there a survey going out to parents, to students who are receiving services, no matter what they are, whether they're interventions, 504, IEP, and how that's going specifically? Because I know it asks if your student is receiving those services, is there like a follow-up question? Because some students had to change from, in the elementary level, had to change from a service provider to a whole different service provider.
Mhm.
And that's going to have the similar effect in how they're perceiving the situation too.
So are you asking, we're doing a separate survey?
Well, I don't know if there's like a follow-up or if that gets too muddied.
Yeah, I think in this instance, I think it's a data point in these overall kind of high level questions. I would say my response would be that's a completely separate survey for those students who are receiving high priority, you know, high priority in-person learners. If we're going to tease that out, I think that would have to be a separate survey. I don't know. There could be a follow-up question.
even students not high priority, our services are hybrid, going AB and then fully remote in the academy.
So it would be a special education student.
Yeah, it
survey.
would have to be different.
Yeah.
There's no way to throw in a couple questions without creating a whole other situation.
I mean, we can play with that. I mean, and again, it doesn't have to all happen tonight, right? It's not deliberating. If there are other questions that you think about, feel free to shoot them to me. And this is built in SurveyMonkey. So we don't have like the Cadillac version where you can, forget what you call it. If you hit yes, you get a whole other track. But I think there might be a way to add some questions. If there are some specific questions that you think would make sense, I'd love if you want to shoot them to me in an email. We'll try and find a way to work it in. Ideally, it's same reason why I started with one survey. The hope was, I think people are surveyed out, but we really want to get their feedback. So it was also kind of hitting that kind of magic threshold of 15, 20 questions where, SurveyMonkey tells you how long it should take. And it tells you the probability that people will complete it. So we wanted to make it easy enough so it's not going to be a massive data set, but hopefully it's a fairly representative data set. So if there are some questions, I would love to find a way to tweak and add those in. Yeah.
I should say all the questions that are in the current survey are on these pages. So there's nothing like you hit yes and it goes someplace else and you're not seeing that here. This is literally the entire survey that's in the packet.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Erin?
So I have just a couple concerns based on the comments that Brian just made. I understand that you want to make sure that the survey is succinct so that people feel that they can go in and answer it, and that it's not going to be too time consuming. But I'm also afraid that if we're not asking the questions or enough questions to make sure that we're getting the end result that we're looking for, that it will be a survey just to gather information that we can't use. I know that there were some concerns with the previous data and how it was interpreted and whether or not we asked enough of the right questions, that sort of thing. Looking at it in hindsight, I'm just afraid that if we're not careful this time around, that we're not going to get somebody to answer the next survey that we need them to answer. And I also want to make sure that we're asking enough questions to be able to get the end result that we're looking for. And maybe that's something that we should be talking about. What is the end result of the survey? What are we going to do with the data? And how are we going to use that data to make sure that we are asking these questions in the right way?
So can I start off by asking, what do you think is missing?
Well, I think that we need to make sure that we're asking if they have multiple kids, if they're planning on filling out multiple surveys so that we get information on each of the kids, or if they're generalizing their statements, especially if the kids are not in the same school.
So real quick, I believe, does it not say at the top? Sorry, I lost my.
It says which school, it says that you can fill one out for every student, but it doesn't ask then if you are filling out just one or if you have multiple students and are filling them out for just the one.
Okay. Okay. I thought it asked you to fill out one for each student.
Yeah, this says please fill one out for each of your children. So that's
correct. And we said we're not specifically data collecting, so we don't know if they have additional children because we don't ask them if they have additional children on this survey and whether or not they're filling out a second survey. We're going to assume that if they have more than one child that they're doing it, but we don't know if that's true. And we also don't know if somebody is filling out the survey multiple times and they only have one child.
Because we get IP addresses.
Okay, so we are getting IP addresses and they're going to be eliminating surveys?
No, because in some cases people will have twins in the same grade. We do, in the past, we've taken it with a grain of salt. If there are 10, right, from the same IP address and it seems to be, the same 3 sets repeating over and over again, right? There's 3 for 3rd grade, 3 for 4th grade, and 4 for 6th grade at one elementary school. Clearly, like, that's going to be taken with a grain of salt. But you know, if there's 2 3rd grades filled out, that can definitely be, you know, family with multiples.
Okay.
Yeah, it's,
Then, go
I would
ahead.
say it's a risk to do an anonymous survey, right? So you do anonymous because you drive more response. People are going to be
Right.
honest.
Yep.
But you also absolutely and without hesitation can say there will be some people that take advantage of that. I think largely, at least for the surveys previously, it seems like you were saying, Narissa, they weren't, I can go through and sort by IP address. I can't go look up the IP address and figure out who it is, but the IP addresses, and I sorted and looked to see if there were multiples, and there were a couple. And then, the previous surveys we were doing, whether it was the kindergarten or that general survey, the more recent ones, we've been asking for parent first and last name and student first and last name. So that's certainly a way when we're saying, tell us what model you're opting into. Are you going to use transportation? What are your thoughts on kindergarten? So that's easy because it's not asking opinion. It's telling, we're requesting information from parents. Where we're asking for opinion. My personal belief is you're going to get a whole lot more responses with a more concise survey and have it be anonymous. But we then have to then caveat that and take it with a grain of salt to say, this is a data set that I cannot verify. So I think it's, I tried to put the statement up there, it says the results of the survey will be used to make adjustments to the overall model where our resources and structures allow, not complete changes to the overall model. So
Right. Right. So then adding on to that, so if you are going to try and get a little bit more to that, there should be a question in each of these surveys that I chose the hybrid model because I was not pleased with the remote option for my child. Like, is that like, what's the driving reason that actually made someone to decide to go in that particular direction? Was it purely because they didn't like the remote option, as we're hearing some of the people give feedback, or were they going to go hybrid regardless when we actually went to go to hybrid, or if they had to weigh the decision based on some other factor? So that's something that we should be asking them.
So I guess back to your question,
Sure.
What are we going to do with the data? So I personally would say, I think that we're going to, so we could ask a lot of questions like that, and then we then have to have a response. So if someone says, I chose remote for medical reasons, right? That's going to be a fairly straightforward answer. Or I chose hybrid when I really want remote, but the remote option stinks because I wanted, it's a high school and I don't like Florida virtual. So I guess then the question is, what are we going to do with that? And how would that be, would we do something different with that response versus the question we ask about the overall belief in the model? And if someone says, I'm at the high school, I'm grade 11, we know they're in Florida virtual, and we've asked questions about the model, which I think would tell us the same thing. It could be slightly different, but I guess that's the question, is what would be, I think that's an incredibly valid question you're asking, which is, we've got to do something with this data. So if we ask 50 questions, that we've got to have, the collective response, we've got to be ready to react to. I think the danger or the downs, or the thing that wasn't worded well in that summer survey is it clearly led parents to believe that whatever they chose, it was going to be a majority rule. And the reality is this was about safety restrictions and, the things that you labored for 4 hours a week every Wednesday night over. So I'm hoping that in drafting this, that was clear in my mind, that this is about asking, give us clear feedback. It's good. It's, on that spectrum, or on that, Likert scale, from a strongly to agree to a strongly disagree. What are your opinions on each of those things? So I think the more we can keep it to that, the more it'll give us data that we can respond to.
So I understand where you're coming from on that, but I don't think that we should close the door to anything, because if someone has an easy suggestion or solution to help make families appreciate the Florida program a little bit better, we should give them the opportunity to hear them out on that.
Yeah,
If it's something as simple as additional check-ins or something along the lines that could be a completely simple fix, I really hope that they feel that they can speak up about it. And I'm worried about the way that some of it's phrased or worded or what we're asking, that we may not get it.
Can I just add too, is we're having a meeting with all of the parents from the Florida virtual school. So we've been in contact with them. We've been collecting feedback, and we're also going to have another meeting with them because we had a pre-meeting before everything started. And we said after we get this up and running in about 2 weeks, we're going to circle back and get everybody together so that they have an opportunity to do exactly what you just said. We need feedback from them. What's working, what's not working. But I think too, going back, just thinking about the conversation about the survey and what do we do with information, I think to have a laser focus of what's the purpose of this survey. So the first survey, what's the purpose? Because there are so many things going on and we could go in 5 different directions. And that's not to say if it's dipsticking to find out where we are within this learning model, then we can, if there's any questions that we're like, this did not come out the way we thought, we need to dig a little deeper, then we can go into that particular direction to find out more information about that particular area. Because the way I was framing this is looking at our reopening plan again, and those pillars and those really pieces that we said were critical as we went into this reopening process. And we said it was about social and emotional, and obviously a quality learning experience for kids, and equity, and making sure all of those things that we built an entire plan around, we have some way of taking an initial sweep to find out on that kind of scale that Brian created, how are we doing? And then that's the first wave. And then after that, when we look at that kind of that first round of data to say, are there any things in that particular survey that jump out like, yikes, we might need to investigate further down or go down this path because this is not coming out how we thought it would, and then use that to maybe preempt another one. And it might be a smaller population. It could be for special ed parents who we realize that their surveys for all across the board were not as strong as some of the other responses. So we need to investigate to see what's going on. I'm just adding my 2 cents. But bringing it back to, it was the Florida virtual school, is that we are absolutely taking those group of individuals, and if they can't make it, we're going to reach out to them to get some input from them, because I think it's so critical at this point to get some input from everybody on all different topics.
I'll just add on from a school committee perspective. When I was looking through the draft of this, I was looking at resources. One of the biggest problems all along, right, is that we have extremely limited resources, staff, funding, everything like that. You can, to some extent, redeploy those a little bit in a different way. And you can also put the focus of people that are more general in specific directions, like in communication. And so my thinking when I was looking at these questions was from where we're at on a school committee side, doing budgeting, being able to influence things like communications, provide some guidance, provide our own meetings to use them as a communication forum, that type of thing. It was where with what you have, can you make a shift to make a difference? And that also goes to, on the safety side, are there additional policies that we could put in place that would provide a backbone that allows for some more actionable, I don't know what word to use, some more action, some additional whatever on the administration side, because that's one of the things we always want to do, right, with our policies, is we want to make sure that we're backing up administration and not asking them to do something that they don't, that we're not providing sort of reinforcement from on the policy side. So I don't know, from the school committee side, that's the kind of lens that I looked at it through when I was looking at this initial draft. You know, you're not going to be able to change Florida virtual to something else. It's not like we can take whatever it was, X number of teachers out of the high school and have them teach an extra section. But there are things I think that can be influenced here, both on the administration side and on the school committee side. So I don't know, to my thinking, the questions were to get at those spots and see where it needs to be, because you can't do them all.
I guess I would say the last two. So provide a few brief words about what's working well and what's not working well. I think that gets to your point, Erin, because there are always going to be things that we don't think to ask and aren't easily, the questions that are not open-ended provide great just visual data, right? It's just graphed. It gives you real quick a snapshot about people's assessment. You then have to dig into the comments to get some of the details. So I'm not opposed to adding questions. I just want to make sure they're questions that are getting at the purpose of what we're looking to do, and then within the means. And I think I like the original. I think on the hybrid survey, did your child change classrooms effective October 27th, right? So were they impacted anyway? It's not going to have changed schools if they're in hybrid. And then on the remote survey, it's, did your child join a classroom with a teacher from a different school? So those are the two questions. I think that's an incredible data point that will be very telling. So I think it's those kind of bang for the buck questions where it's a very straightforward question, but we can do some great analyzing of that data to give us some very important information. And we can certainly play with, adding a couple of special ed follow-up questions. I think if we could get some meaningful 1 or 2 questions following up there, that'd be great. And certainly if there are other questions, I don't know, Erin or others.
Erin, did you want to add anything else or come back to any of those thoughts? I don't know if that answered. You had like 4 questions to start with, so I feel like we kind of hit them all, but at different.
Yeah. Yeah, I know you had the open-ended at the end too, and I was wondering if it wasn't a requirement to answer it, whether or not it would be helpful to have an open end after each question, just so if somebody has a comment about that one particular thing, they can quickly jot it there instead of having to review it all at the end.
Mm-hmm. We can do that. Yep.
And then if it's not a required field, they can skip it.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments or questions before Caitlin?
Brian, I think just for the special ed services, it can be just as easily as, I am satisfied with the services. Nothing like, you don't, obviously we can't go down the rabbit hole because that's just a whole other, but I am satisfied with if you're in hybrid, I am satisfied with the way my child is receiving services, because they could be receiving them on their remote day, or they could be receiving them on their in-person day, just depending on what their service is. And then fully remote kids changed either teacher or school. So the same question, I am satisfied with the changes in my child's services or provider. And it's just simple as like a strongly disagree, strongly agree situation. And then you'll get just a quick snapshot of whether or not those changes had a negative or positive impact.
I like that. And actually then it gives us a data set, and if there's a strongly disagree, and whether someone checked 504 or IEP, then that gives us we follow up with that, right? And
Yeah,
like,
it's just enough for,
we,
and then they feel like they've been heard because they're the middle of the road IEPs and 504s are the hardest to get the temperature of.
right, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments on the survey? I'd like to just add one quick, if I could, Brian. I think it would be helpful at the end to say, you know, if you have questions that need to be answered, because I think people don't always realize that it's an anonymous survey. I've definitely seen other surveys where the open-ended responses will say, you know, can you tell me X? And there's no one to get back to because it's an anonymous survey. Can we just put at the end something like, if you have specific questions, please contact, and have a point of contact if they need an answer?
So yeah, if you have questions, Kim Croto.
You can use the school committee address and we can clearinghouse them. I mean, I don't care one way or another, you know?
No, and I think, I think if there's, no, I mean, you tell me if you want it to be the school committee, but that's not, that doesn't need to be in your purview, right? So certainly you're going to get all the results reported to you, but you don't need to be synthesizing. No. Again, if you're begging for it, you let me know. But I think that
Thanks, appreciate that.
We provide the data.
All right, can we move on to HVAC assessment?
Can I ask two things about the remote one? Because I thought we were doing them one at a time.
Oh, sorry, nope. Go
It's
ahead.
okay. On the remote one, it might be helpful if we ask if someone's considering going hybrid and how soon. Because that'll at least give you a temperature gauge as to whether or not somebody's contemplating telling you soon that they're going to be coming in. And then the other one on the remote one was just a temperature gauge on whether or not they still feel like they're part of the Triton community or if they feel that they're segmented.
I was going to say, did that?
I don't remember if it was in there, but I put a note as for that.
It's the same. It's number 12. I'm confident my child's social and emotional needs are being met. It's not the same. All right.
Thanks.
I like it.
Anything else? Linda?
Do we have anything on the survey about the buses? I know that you were asking if people have seen anything, but maybe just ask the parents.
There are questions about the buses on there because I remember having this conversation.
I was going to say.
I think it's about bus. Oh, hang on.
Yeah, so on the hybrid, it says my child is using district provided transportation. I believe it is working well and that my child is safe while riding the bus or van. So
Nothing about windows? I'm just kidding.
and
Or
masks.
masks.
Linda.
Masks.
Yeah, or masks.
All right. Any other comments or questions on the survey? All right, on to HVAC.
Kyle, you're up.
Yeah, I can take that one. So included here, we have 4 reports. That's the culmination of all the work we've been doing with the engineering firm. Again, hats off to our maintenance staff, our facilities director for all the work they've been doing over the last couple months on these repairs and getting the rooms up to speed. So in holding those discussions, again, increased filtration, increased airflow. For the filtration, we upgraded the filters in all the systems. And then for the airflow, we had the engineering firm Aerodyne. They went through every room of every building and metered the air exchange. The industry standard for each room is 4 air exchanges per hour. So if you look at these reports, the first one is a summary of the process that we went through. Again, in August was the initial readings. In September, we made all the repairs. Early October, remetered a handful of rooms. We had to be strategic in those to keep it within the constraints of our contract with them. Again, that contract was for $60,000, and it initially was developed just on the initial meterings, but we were able to come to an agreement with them where we didn't meter the Pine Grove school since it's a new school, and we used those hours to remeter some of the classrooms. Then let's see if we look at I'll go through the reports one by one, kind of briefly, and then figure I can just I'll talk about the themes and then I can take questions. So starting with the Triton High School, Middle School campus, looking at the columns. So there's the room number, the room volume that gives context to the size of the space, whether it's a gymnasium, a classroom, or a closet. And then the air exchanges per hour. For any space that had an air exchange of less than 4, there's commentary there provided by the firm. They worked hand in hand with us. We went through an initial draft, and then they were able to put in some of our commentary too, which they agreed with and they were comfortable putting in there. So starting at the top there, some of the themes. So the woodshop room, A105, you can see that had a 2.9 air exchange. The reason for that one is actually a design challenge where the HVAC system in that room will never achieve a 4. So what we did is we put in a HEPA air purifier. The music practice rooms, those have the split ductless HVAC systems that are similar to the ones you see in your homes, to where they filter the air in that space, but they don't actually exhaust it out of the room. So that's why you see a 0. Those rooms are designed to just have one person in them at a time. So no long-term issue there in terms of the risks associated with COVID. The gymnasium, that has since been resolved. If you walk into those spaces, you will know it is exchanging air very, very well. You can feel the breeze before you even enter the room. And then let's see,
that gets the award for the most improved.
Yeah,
it's like literally a wind tunnel when you round the corner there.
I turned the corner in the hallway and I just smiled. I was like, nice. So that's definitely a safe space for all.
Can you pause for a second, Kyle? Paul Mayette has a question.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, that was by accident, but but I actually did have a question. I just figured I'd wait till the end. So would you be better to wait off to the end?
Either way.
Just on the practice rooms, while only one person is in there at a time, so you said it filters the air that they breathe? Because I'm just thinking one person goes in, sings, plays, whatever, expels all of that, and there's any number of particles left in the air when the next person comes in. Is there time between people going in there, or is that being filtered like you implied that? I just wanted to kind of clarify that point.
That's a very fair question, and I can follow up on that to see exactly what logistically is going on and if there's enough time. If there isn't, we have plenty of the air purifiers available, so we could always wheel one into each of those spaces as well. But I'll absolutely follow up on that. Thanks.
Haley's got a question as well, if we could, before you go on, Kyle. Sorry.
Yeah. No, this is great. I mean, keep them coming as we go.
It's not really a question. It's just, I know from the point of view of a student in the department that deals with the practice rooms, there's definitely a large amount of time in between the usage of them.
Okay. That's great to know.
I couldn't tell you the exact amount. It depends on the day and what shows are going on, but there's definitely room in between.
Our understanding was that they're not heavily used at all. One was described as barely used. So this is not, to your point, Paul, I think you're envisioning, right? Student in, student out, practice in, practice out. I think that would be a very different scenario. But if and when they're used, as Kyle said, we've got the HEPA filters ready to roll in. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Kyle.
So scrolling down through the other pages, you can see the commentary is pretty self-explanatory. If if it was below and it was still needing repair, we have a HEPA filter. That one on page 2 was actually it went out. We're going to encounter issues where throughout the year a system might go down, and this is actually one of those examples between the meterings. So we moved a HEPA filter in there, and I believe that's since been fixed. We did get the opportunity to remeter, have our mechanical maintenance contractor, they have a metering device where they can remeter certain rooms. So we had a number of those remetered, and you can see they're now above the 4 air exchanges per hour. And then I'd like to go to the last page where it's the storage closets and bathrooms are separated out. So all of those bathroom meterings were the results of the exhaust fans being down. Early September, you might have seen the cranes in front of the school. So that's part of what was being fixed, where they were replacing some that weren't functional. So those have all been since fixed. I'll just jump to the other 2 real quick. So Salisbury, again, same type of themes. We moved some portable HEPA filters in the spaces if they were reading below the 4 air exchanges per hour. There are a number of rooms where, sorry, I just blanked. They were below the 4 air exchanges per hour. The mechanical maintenance contractor has since fixed those. They fixed them, but didn't remeter them. But actually this morning they remetered them. So I should be getting those results, but they assured that they are well above the 4. So we have a very high degree of confidence with those. For the gymnasium at Salisbury Elementary, so that is a HVAC design challenge as well, where it will never achieve a 4 air exchanges per hour. But we're investigating a long-term solution for that, but based on the number of students that are in that space at a given time, PE classes average around 12 students. We're having the students be outside as much as possible. If they're inside, we're having the doors open, or at least cracked open, to get some outside air coming in. And like Brian was mentioning before, pairing that with all the layers of additional measures with masks, hand sanitizers, the cleaning of the spaces every day by our custodial staff, and then the volume of the room. We're certainly going to be looking into that further, but we're confident that that's a safe space at its current standing. And then again, at the bathrooms, at the end there was a single source issue that's since been repaired. And jumping to Newberry, finally, there were a couple storage spaces. So in Newberry, there were certain classrooms or larger spaces that were down that require extensive work. They are not being used by students and staff, and they have not been used by students and staff in a long time. They've been used for storage. So because of financial constraints, we're holding off on updating those spaces for now. But we are looking into that and getting quotes for long-term. But then in the other rooms, if they were below, actually at Newberry, there were no classrooms. There were a couple small spaces, which is evident by the volume on the room there, where they're only used by a couple staff or students at a time. So we placed HEPA air filtration devices in there. And that summarizes most of it. I can certainly take questions on any individual spaces or the process as a whole.
Questions from the committee? There's Kyle, on the elementary schools, it was evident where the cafeteria was on the list. At the middle school, high school, it's not. Do you know how that's, I'm assuming it was tested. Do you know what the room designation or whatever is for that?
Not offhand, but
okay.
Looking at, I could offer guesses just by the volumes of the room. It would probably be maybe an L100,
okay.
But I can absolutely check that. But it was absolutely included in the scope of this. Yeah.
Okay, and the auditorium, I'm assuming, is in that list too. It's really
Absolutely.
hard to be able to pick out what those spaces are.
Yeah, I understand. I'm just trying to think of if
No,
there's
it's
any.
good.
Okay,
I
yeah,
just wanted to make sure that they had been done and were on that list, and we're all set to go.
absolutely. So what the process was is we gave them a floor plan of the whole facility, and then one by one, they mapped it all out like that.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. And I should note too that this was not in the original agenda packet, so it's not up on the website right now, but I believe this is being posted somewhere.
We'll post it on the website. Yep, it's been provided to president of the unions and stuff, so absolutely.
Okay. All right, perfect, thank you. Any other questions or comments on this before we move on?
So
All right.
if I can add one thing, so again, huge thank you to Kyle, AKA HVAC guy, who has had a crash course on this. And so it's been our custodial crew, Chris Walsh and Kyle, have done a tremendous amount of work. There are so many districts who are just now trying to figure this out, and it gives me great confidence. Amazing the number of new complaints that people have said, my gosh, this is so loud in here now because there's 40,000 air changes an hour. But a huge thank you to Kyle and all the work that everyone's done, because this is a significant improvement. So worth noting.
Thank you, Kyle, and Chris Walsh as well, I should say, because I know it was a joint effort, but well done.
Definitely a team effort. Thank you.
This can be, on your resume as. I now know what MERV stands for. Check. All right. Any other questions before we move on? All right, seeing none, moving into metrics for reopening or closing schools. So this is a conversation that so let me just open this by saying, I know this is the timing on this is really bad. I realized a couple of weeks ago that basically right after our last meeting, that there was going to be issues with the way that it's a lot of it's the size of our towns, right? And the idea that COVID tends to happen in clusters. It's not typically a case here or there, although it can be. It's typically, a small group that pops up at once, which tends to be larger portions of our population because we are small towns. I'm going to take you real quick through, it's the second item on this agenda item, which is the weekly report. So this is now posted on the Stay Connected site every week. The two reports that this is pulled from come out every Thursday now, so this gets updated pretty quickly. To just give you a quick rundown on this, on the left-hand side, we're using total community cases. This is coming straight from the weekly health report that's published by Mass DPH every Thursday. We've specifically opted to use total community cases because for a couple of reasons. One, because the report doesn't state new cases per week. If they're under 5, so if you have 2 cases, it just says you have cases under 5, and it doesn't actually say how many new cases a specific town has. The other reason is that sometimes towns can vary. So there may have been, let's just say for sake of an argument, 7 cases last week. One of those was a positive that was on a rapid test. And at the same time that the rapid test was run, as often happens for someone who's symptomatic, PCR, the longer term, more accurate test was run as well. The rapid test came back positive, the PCR came back negative. That case was initially counted as a new case last week, but it was taken off of the tally with the PCR negative coming back because it's kind of the overriding more accurate test. So things like that are happening. So we're always looking at the cumulative number of positive cases for a specific town and comparing those week to week for each of our 3 towns to determine how many new cases there are in the last 2 weeks, because it gives us a better number on that. If you look on the right-hand side in the blue column, it actually looks at those 2-week timeframes to look at the all 3 towns across the communities to show how many new cases there were in the last 14 days. I'll look real quick down below at the bottom. Below that, that is the new cases among on-campus individuals. That is pulled directly from the DESE report that's published every week. That comes out, so it's essentially information that the district reports to DESE, and DESE then compiles that into a report and publishes it out to the on the web. That is not cumulative. So that's new cases, not cumulative cases. Last week, I think it was, maybe a week and a half ago, the second page was added that's here. And it talks about essentially where the information is pulled off of those reports, what to look for if you're looking at the main reports, and why, because there was a lot of confusion over, I think, a couple of different things. One that that I heard from multiple people that we were using the percent positives, which we weren't. There's literally one number that's being used, one column off of this report. And then the other thing was a confusion. There's a number that's positive tests, and positive tests does not equate to new cases. Sometimes it's the same person being tested multiple times. Sometimes it is even in different weeks in some cases. So it's not a direct correlation to the number of new cases that we have. If you look at page 1, what started to concern me a couple of weeks ago, if you look at it, is in September 16th, there were 2 cases in the last 2 weeks for the entire district, 2 new cases. And then the following week, the 24th, there were 3 new cases for the previous 2 weeks. And then it jumps way up to 12. Based on our current metrics, if we had been fully in person, a 12 would have bumped us back into hybrid. But as you'll see, if you look at the next 2-week period, it would have bumped us right back out because that drops us down to 8. It would be below the 10 person or 10 new case community spread metric, number that's in that metric. So, and then it goes down, you'll see it's 5, and then it jumps up to 15. And then this week it brings us up to 21. Additionally concerning, I would say even more concerning in that, is if you look at the individual week numbers, you can actually see that there were no new cases between the weeks of September 30th and October 1st. So in there's actually a 0 that followed, you know, a week of 4 cases. Sorry, a week of 8 cases, and there's a lot of fluctuation there. And I think with, again, small towns, small numbers of cases, but it happening in clusters, this is the type of thing that is going to happen. The state has advised us, well, the state has advised us of many things, but the state has advised us to do is actually consult 3 different reports. So it would be 4 weeks of data, and look at those all together in making a decision. Because of this, I imagine there were other towns, other municipalities, and other districts that were seeing this type of fluctuation, where 1 week their metric could literally put them into hybrid, and the next week could put you possibly into remote, and then, you know, the next week you could essentially be down to a 0 week. What ideally you'd want to be looking for is trends. When your line is trending above a certain threshold, then that's where the concern should happen. If you have a blip above a threshold, that arguably on their side should be of less concern. I will say there's a lot of state guidance that I don't agree with. This one in particular, I think, makes a lot of sense. Coupled with that, we had a question that I thought was very valid about is there a situation, which is not called for in our current metric, where we shut the buildings for a set period of time to everyone except essential personnel, right? So our current remote model that we've been working with has staff working in the buildings, working from the buildings, and it also has in-person high-risk students 5 days a week. And the concern was, and I heard this, from multiple fronts, where's the line drawn, I guess, that says, we need to empty those buildings and make sure that kind of any possible transmission is under control, so that, and appropriate measures are taken to make sure that everyone stays safe. So I apologize for just getting this out to you today, but I sent around a PDF earlier. It is a task, I have to say, to try to make this as simplistic as possible so that it's really understandable. But I think we attempted to do this. I worked on this with Brian and with Maureen. It includes the original kind of notions behind our metric. It doesn't specifically, gives a nod to testing, mentions that there may be other things that are weighed in making a long-term decision. And I think, testing and contact tracing and ventilation will always be some of those items that we're looking at and making sure that we're continuing to meet those and checking back in on them. But the three primary things that that we'll be looking at on an ongoing basis are the community spread, the school positives, things that have among individuals that have been on our campuses, and whatever the prevailing public health guidance is on social distancing. So this metric that I'd like to propose as a replacement to the existing metric actually causes the district and the school committee to consider 3 weeks of reporting when we're looking at community spread, 2 weeks when we're looking at cases in schools, and also it adds an additional trigger point, I guess I'd call it, where if we have a week in any model with 3 or more cases on one campus, or a week in any model with 5 or more cases across the district, or a week in remote where we have 2 consecutive weeks with 3 or more cases in the schools. So that's essentially saying we've got staff in the schools and we've got high-risk students in the schools, and we're continuing to have cases in the schools, that immediately moves the district without a school committee vote into a 2-week period where only essential personnel are in the buildings. We've said previously that Brian, as the superintendent, would have the ability to do a short-term shutdown. This would be a longer-term shutdown, which I think, Brian could do a 2 or 3 day shutdown to give us time to meet to do something longer. But to my thinking, this gives families the ability to plan, which is something that we've heard is important, rather than being told that it's a 2 or 3 day shutdown and then having that extended. This would be a very definitive, it's going to be 2 weeks of a shutdown with only essential personnel allowed in the buildings, going through essentially that quarantine period to try to get any transmission under control. So it's a kind of a known upfront, and provides Brian with some backing, I guess I would say, on the school committee side, to make sure that, that there's a quick and definitive reaction in the cases that we have, new cases in our buildings. So that is in context with also on that, the weekly report page, that this week would bump, the report showed new community spread of 21 cases, Brian has been reaching out to the town health departments, so he can give us a quick update on what, it was specifically Newbury and Salisbury where those cases were. Raleigh did, I don't believe they had any, or if it was, or it was very small. Let me just look back real quick at that number. It was, sorry, forward, there we go. So it was 1 in Raleigh. So the primary places of concern were Newbury, which moved them, again, I don't put a whole lot of faith in the color coding because we're such small towns. It takes very, very little for us to move from one color to another. But Newbury was yellow in last week's report, and Salisbury was red in last week's report. So I'll bump it over to Brian, and then I think we're going to have a discussion on this one.
Yeah, so just, I mean, the context, the questions I asked, Deb and Jack specifically, that the health agents for Newbury and Salisbury were in regards to the new cases. Obviously, they can't give us details or give me details, but, was there a single household? Was there a specific party? Was there a specific spreader event? And for both of them, they reported that there wasn't any one large scale event. It was multiple cases, multiple households, multiple, I forget there was a specific term used, but in the tracing, it was tracing out to multiple places. They did all confirm that none of them traced back to any Triton connections. I know there was a question about a case or some cases at the Govs Academy, and confirmed that none of those traced back to Triton students. So there's no, it's always helpful to be able to kind of caveat the data. As Narissa said, it doesn't take a whole lot of cases to shift from gray straight to red. And on top of that, if we then know now the state report now has asterisks on, you keep hearing Middleton as the example where the jail has accounted for, I don't know the number, but a significant percentage of the new cases happening in the town of Middleton. That the state did, and now caveats and adds an asterisk to any community where there's an entity, an organization, where the numbers are being skewed by one particular location or entity. So my efforts will be to continue to stay in contact with them, to understand if the data is skewed in any way and that there's any one particular event or organization that is causing the numbers that to look higher than in reality it's playing out to be, as well as they're in great communication now. Kristen Jolivet was hired collectively by the 3 towns to be the Triton school coordinator for tracing. So she connects fairly routinely with Tara O'Keefe, our lead nurse, as well as the other 4 nurses to make sure that there's any questions, any tracing. There's constant lines of communication there. So
I'll open up at this point. I would say, I mean, that it takes a school committee vote to change models, right? So there could potentially be a vote tonight. We could, adapt the original set of metrics that we had. We could leave those alone. We could take the new set of metrics that I tried to put together based on, numbers and kind of what the state's been saying, and what seems to make sense is I'm pulling those weekly reports and looking at that data every single week. We could look at that, at bringing that in and adopting it. There are, multiple, we could simply say we're going to wait another week and look at one more week of data, and that's only going to be for this particular time period that we're doing. Lots of different options that we can take here. So I'd leave it open and ask what the will of the committee is and where people's opinions are. Nobody? Tina?
I'll just say up front that I haven't had enough time to go through the data and review a switch to new metrics. So for me, I don't know that I would feel comfortable taking a vote tonight. I'd like to at least wait one more week before taking a vote. I'm happy to hear other people's thoughts, but that's just that's how I would feel if we were to take a vote tonight. I don't think I could myself.
And that's fair. I can only say that, you know, we started having this conversation before that number tick up was really happening, and it's not an easy thing to put together these numbers in a way that makes sense and kind of address all the issues. And we went through text documents and flow charts and tables to try and find a way to make it to a way to communicate it well. And this is the best it came down to, but it took a significant amount of time to get to this point, and I apologize for not getting it out earlier. I think, you know, if we could have, we would have.
Oh, I don't think you need to
Yeah.
apologize, Narissa. I know you've been working really hard, and I think the fact that you've been doing this is great. So I don't think there's any apology necessary. And quite honestly, we're in now week 2 of hybrid. My son is in cohort B and went to school today, and selfishly, it's been going great. So I don't know that I can, without, you know, in proper judgment, even, you know, talk about making a call, because I don't want to go back. That's me being honest.
Can I add one suggestion? I mean, I think that it's a very different metric. It looks different. It reads different. I think one of the key distinguishers is the use of 3 weeks worth of data. And I think that's an important delineation, because technically, by design, you hit 21, or we hit 21 community cases. So technically, again, I think there's 2 key points. A, it's a metric that requires you to come back and discuss. There are certainly numbers that trigger automatic, right? Where automatically, if the numbers are getting to a point where, you know, 3+, 5+, that buildings are going to shift automatically to essential personnel only. But community cases, it triggers a discussion. So certainly you're having a discussion tonight. But I think if you could even agree on the concept of using 3 weeks worth of data, that's an important point. And if everyone's on board with that, that I think kind of takes you, I don't know what the right term is, kind of takes you out of violation of the originally worded metric. Because technically you're at 20, you know, communities at 21, and it lists 20 as the threshold. So, I mean, you're having a conversation, that's good. But I think that 3 weeks of data is, for me, I personally fully believe that it's the right thing to do, just because of the volatility of those numbers. But I think that's an important, I don't know if that's a separate agreement or how you action that.
Linda?
No, Brian, I think that's a fair estimation. I think with the rising cases that are happening, I think we need to put something in writing so that it gives you the leeway to make that decision without having to worry about whether we would agree with you or not. So I would agree with the 3 week data points.
Well, the 3 weeks will just trigger us coming back to have a vote at that point if it stays that high, right? It's always on a school committee vote for a long-term model shift. Brian can do, you know, whatever. Again, that idea of you have a new case pop up that you believe you have close contacts in the school. They're going to walk in the building at, you know, whatever, 7:30 tomorrow morning, and it's 10 o'clock at night. When you find out you've got a new case, you have to do something to do contact tracing, right? That's a time when he might call a short-term couple of days. This would always come back to a school committee vote for a long-term shift. With adding in the 14 days, I was looking, I think, to take some of the pressure off and put some predictability in, and also satisfy that need, which I think is, again, is very valid, to say, when is that point where everyone's out of the building, except for, you know, again, truly essential personnel.
Right. I mean, it's going to be a hard call no matter what, but at least if we put something in writing, it gives everybody a guideline.
Paul Mayette?
I was going to say if there's anything that I feel we would want to move on tonight, it would be giving that authorization that 2 weeks. I think that's something that's more likely to pop up quickly with God forbid a party or something like that. So that's something that, you know, if we're deciding on using the 3 weeks of data, we've got some time before we are looking at 3 weeks at this point. But that is something where I think that could come up at any time. And I think that it's an important thing to do. I'm myself finishing 2 weeks remote, having been bumped there, and knowing that going into it, knowing that I would be teaching from here for 2 weeks allowed me to plan out and adjust my lessons ahead of time. And I think that giving teachers that is huge.
Thanks. Other comments? Okay, thoughts on what action we want to take? I mean, I definitely hear Tina, like this was not a lot of time. I think I sent it at what, 12:30 or something like that. I don't even remember what time it was, but like early afternoon. So not a tremendous amount of time to look it over, and it's a 3-page document. Do we want to just alter for right now the existing metric to take into account a 2-week or a 3-week time period instead, and then come back and reconsider you know, a much larger change to the metric, you know, either a week or 2 weeks out? Is that a good middle ground? Are people comfortable? You know, I heard Tina say that she's not comfortable taking a vote on an entirely new metric tonight. I don't know where everybody else on the committee is. Anybody? I know nobody slept last night, but throw me some bones here, guys.
So I guess I'm a little confused still on what the difference would be. So if we're at 21 right now, according to what I thought, technically we should be going back to remote, correct?
We should be taking
based
a
on our
vote.
previous taking
Yeah.
a vote. Okay. So if we change it to 3 weeks, that means we're going to add an additional week on. So maybe next week we'd be having the conversation about whether or not we're going to take a vote for going full remote. Is that accurate?
No, if it moves from 1 week to 3 weeks, then that would mean in 2 weeks, because this would be, last Thursday was week 1, right? Tomorrow we'll get the week 2 data. The week 3 data would be next Thursday. So we could meet essentially anytime after that if we're going to look at 3 weeks worth of data. Right, because the first week over where it violates is community spread over 20 new cases, right? So if it's whatever 21 new cases this week, or technically last week, right? It was last Thursday's number, right? And tomorrow came out to be 25, right? And the following week came out to be 22. Then anytime after that, that would be the 3 weeks in a row, right? That would trigger a vote to happen. If it's 21 this week and what comes out tomorrow is 18, that essentially resets the clock, right? We wait again until it goes up above 20, and then when it stays above 20 for 3 consecutive weeks, then that's what's triggering a vote. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the explanation makes sense. I don't know if the decision, I don't know where I stand, what I feel about the decision though.
Okay.
Can you also explain to me the new cases on campus among on-campus individuals? Did I hear you correctly when you just said that is anybody that stepped foot in a school that has tested positive?
Yes. Yep. So that's
regardless
the
of
way,
whether or not it's being traced back to being in school from where they got it. Is that accurate?
correct. It's not about transmission. It's
Okay,
about, yeah, cases that have in our schools. So that's where Brian had to report the athletics one earlier. They had, on our campuses, I guess, right? It was a student transmission, as far as I know. I don't know a whole lot, was, you know, probably not in our schools since there was only one case identified. So in that case, that pops up on the report in the October 2nd as being a single student, right? And then there were no other cases related to that. Again, transmission not in our schools. It just happened to be someone who was on our campuses, student, staff, somebody who was on our campuses that tested positive.
and other than that one case, there's been nobody else in the entire school that's set foot in that has had a case.
That I'll always caveat that with that we know of, right? You know, we know that there are individuals that are asymptomatic.
Right.
So no one that's tested positive that we know of.
No.
So
Have we had anybody that has been sent home with symptoms that has refused to take a test?
I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, and then they stay out for the full period of time.
So we don't know whether or not they had it and spread.
We can't force anyone to take a
Yeah,
test.
we will not.
I
have-
understand that. I understand it, but that's my concerns that would go against the argument of waiting for 3 full weeks. That I'm trying to just get information, gather data on. So I'm
the
just
3
trying to.
3 full weeks is community spread.
No, I understand that. But again, somebody that's out in the community that doesn't get tested again is going to fall in that same category.
Yeah.
So
There's probably a fair number of cases, you know, have been through the months out in the community that were positive and we'll never know, right? Some of those people will get the antibody and may test positive afterwards, you know, for antibodies, showing that they've probably had it at some point in the past. Others will either never get tested or they might test negative even if they had COVID.
right. Can we also talk a little bit about the elimination of certain cases? So I understand, are we immediately eliminating college students that are registered to live on campus? Because I'm curious to find out whether or not we've tracked how many times they've been home since in close proximity to when they were tested, regardless of whether or not they live on campus.
Right. So the contact tracers do that. So part of that contact tracing process, right, is they're putting in a phone call based on the information that was, I believe, submitted with the test, is what I understand, is that's basically what ends up in Maven and ends up getting transferred to a public health nurse for follow-up, or into the contact tracing collaborative or wherever it gets assigned. And then when they're making that phone call, if that, you know, person that's answering is like, no, you know, I haven't been home, there are no close contacts in my house because I haven't been there. You know, I've been on campus the whole time, but that's where I grew up, right? That's where my family still lives. So that's what I listed as an address rather than University of Colorado. In that situation, right, that has to get transferred out of Rowley and into, I don't know where the University of Colorado is, honestly. Should have picked a better place. Denver, as far as the city of residence.
Okay.
And then that is essentially getting attributed there rather than attributed to Rowley.
And that has absolutely been the case. And speaking with the health agents, there have been both where a student was home or wasn't home and was reporting the opposite. And so those cases can sometimes come on the rolls 3 weeks later because it's a matter of categorizing it accurately to where the student is residing, not where he or she may have grown up. So that is an active contributor in cases and speaking with them.
Okay. Can we talk a little bit about, I know you also mentioned in the new document, the business address that's being supplied. If there is evidence that the individual got it at work, are they still eliminating those cases out of the numbers when someone gave a business address as opposed to a residence?
It's by the town of residence. So let's say that they work in Rowley, just use for an example again, but they live in wherever, Haverhill, right? So they got tested. This is my understanding what sometimes happens. The company will say, everyone here is going to get tested. We're going to pay for testing essentially, right? And then the person that gets tested lists the business address. So it gets assigned to the business. There may be close contacts at that business, but the actual case is in wherever the person lives, right?
So it's
because they're not a
even
Raleigh
if
resident.
even if everyone at that business tested positive, so you know that the location was there, it's still not going to be attributed to that address. I'm just trying to get
Correct.
an understanding why it would had why it was even coming up on the
Yeah. So it would literally be like business was at 123 Main Street. They contracted to do the testing. The person is from out of town who tests positive, right? That initially may be assigned in the Maven system based on the business address, right? But the person lives elsewhere. So that, again, contact tracer is making the call. The person's like, oh no, I live in Georgetown, right? That then gets essentially transferred in to Georgetown as the town of residence.
Okay.
Does that make sense? There may be
It
close
does.
contacts are identified
Right.
that are in one of our 3 towns, but that particular case may be transferred out.
But we don't ever get,
Okay.
we don't know the details of those
Right.
cases. But I
Okay.
do know, talking to Jack, that there were some cases of, I think it was a Southern New Hampshire business where residents lived. And so they were originally reported in New Hampshire, and sometimes it can be 2-week lag from New Hampshire to get it back over the state border into Maven. So
Yeah.
going back to, if families aren't telling us and identifying, or staff members, I'm very confident that staff members are telling us, but if families aren't telling us, then it could be quite a while before we know about the case.
Yeah.
Okay.
Part of the point here is that it just sometimes it takes time to iron those out and figure out where those cases actually belong, which part of looking at a longer time period is giving that space to happen.
Okay.
And that's why Brian went very quickly back this time to check those cases, because in the past, it may be a situation, we've definitely seen situations in the past where a town may show, X cumulative cases one week, and then it's X -1 the next week. And that's because of either, rapid test that was positive and then came back, the long-term test came back negative, or they've been assigned to our towns and, it was definitely a case, right? But it was misassigned. So then they need to reassign those to the appropriate town where the person actually resides, so that contact tracer can then track that person ongoing.
Okay. Then lastly, can you talk a little bit more about the new school cases paragraph on your new document? We talk about across multiple households, and the data points that we would use for that. Now, my concern or my question that comes with this one is whether or not we should be flexible or giving more weight to this, because we could have a parent teaching at the high school, and we could, or even at Salisbury Elementary is where they teach. They have a kid in Pine Grove, and they have a kid at the high school or middle school, and they all come back testing positive. That's 3 different schools that we've just had instances. But if we're saying that it has to be separate families, despite the fact that it's across the 3 schools, how would we handle those and under this circumstance?
So this was pulled directly from our original metric, and the idea there, was that that's probably spread happening in the household. It's much more likely that we have spread happening in our buildings when we have it across multiple households, right? Or there's a larger community event, shall I say? where there's been some spread, where we may be seeing additional cases, and that's why a more conservative action would be called for.
Okay.
'Cause
Thanks.
household transmission is, right, you're in close contact. There's very little airflow in a lot of houses. People aren't wearing masks at home generally. So that's where a lot of household or where a lot of transmission is happening. I think the latest state number showed that roughly half of the cluster or half of the cases that they identified, they couldn't trace them back. But of the other half where they could identify, about 80-something% of those were to households.
Okay, and then can we also talk about the considerations for a move from remote to hybrid or hybrid to fully in person? We talk in the document about whether the CDC or some other standard comes out that says that the 6 foot doesn't need to happen anymore and that we would go with that. I'm wondering if this would come back to the committee to vote on whether or not we would be adjusting it, or if we would be sticking to what scientific data that we were able to supply or reference or utilize to be able to understand whether it really is better, or if it's some sort of motivated move or comment that went out there to influence an agency to change the guidelines based on some outside influence.
Mhm.
And I know that I'm being very vague because I don't want to say some political influence telling them that they need to go and change the guidelines. So now all of a sudden they're forced to change what they really believe with scientific fact as to be able to follow along what they're being directed to by their boss.
I knew you were where you're going. You didn't have to beat me over the head with it.
Okay. So I'm concerned that just by way of my interpretation of what's written in the document, that it doesn't give us that ability to do it, that it says we would go with the guidance and then make the move.
No, it doesn't say that, because it says the committee would have to request, right?
I didn't take that from it, but again, I don't know if I read it too quickly.
So, so it says, if social distancing recommendations from global or national health organizations are reduced from the current 6 foot to a lesser distance, the school committee will request that the district
A new feasibility study.
Yeah.
But so I would think that instead of spending the time on the feasibility study, that we would discuss whether or not it was even
gonna be
something
both.
that we wanted to move to. Okay. And
Right?
then do we have the information on that last feasibility study so that we can refer back to it, so we know like what the makeups of the rooms are and how many kids are supposed to be in each room and whether or not that's being followed?
Yeah, Brian has all of that. That's there was a software program that actually allowed you to map out every single room in the district, looking at different distances, and I assume we still have all that, Brian?
Well, yeah, and the 6 feet.
That doesn't go anywhere.
On the 6 feet, yeah.
Yeah, the 6
On
feet.
anything.
It's how classrooms are set up now, right? So
Okay.
between cohort hybrid students and in-person high priority students, we've mostly capped out our capacity in most classrooms. So, I mean, at the high school, it's different, right? You've got, depending on classes and class selection, there could be small classes and larger classes. But, you know, specifically elementary and middle, where the classes are more balanced, we're pretty much at the 6 foot capacity.
And we went back in and checked to make sure that we weren't going over any of the required spacing that we had mapped out over the summer, to make sure that we weren't just trying to squeeze another kid into a classroom at any point.
So they're at 6 feet. That's the question. So
I know that not every classroom has the same capacity. Did we double check to make sure that teachers were in a space with, you know, the max number of kids that they have assigned at any particular time, that we did go back in and revisit that before stepping foot into school?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, you know, there are at the high school level, there are classes that are meeting in the library because there was one or two too many kids to fit in a regular classroom. So again, just by the nature of the high school schedule, it's you can't balance classrooms perfectly. At the elementary, I mean, we're talking, yellow tape and where desks go, and very, very, very structured. So yes, absolutely. I'm very confident that all of the desks are at 6 feet. They're movable, right? So
And
during,
we accounted for additional personnel that comes in to assist students on a ongoing basis, that sort of thing too.
it's total numbers, total bodies in the classroom. Yep.
Okay, and can I clarify something else? Because this is like based on the emails that are coming out. Masks off, we talked about 10 feet requirement, not 6 feet requirement. And I believe that's where we landed, but I'm hearing that that's not what we're directed to hearing that they're directed to do, that masks off at 6 feet's okay.
This
When?
was 10 feet for gym. I'd have to look back.
Gym, it's 10 feet.
So it was something that we talked about, that anytime a mask would be off, it had to be 10 feet because it correlated over into how far the musicians would have to be outside from each other and what you would need for tent space for somebody that was in theater to be able to do, when we were talking about, you know, pie in the sky, if we had all the money in the world to be able to set up an outdoor location for these things, that we talked about mask off as 10 feet. Is that not the case? Because
So-
I know we talked about snack time and all that other stuff, and we said that we would revisit it as we were going to start opening up, and I don't know where we landed.
Yep, so it was never 10 feet for general. It was always 10 feet for PE or anything extra expelling of air, right? So singing, music, theater, gym, when you increase respiration. So
Mhm.
it was never, and nowhere in the documentation is it 10 feet masks off, or 10 feet to have masks off. So in the classroom, the original DESE guides was 6 feet for eating and suggesting in the classroom. We did figure out how to use cafeterias, and it actually works well. And in most cases, it can be a little more than 6 feet. But in the classroom, you know, ideally, mask breaks are happening outside, but absolutely, there are times when mask breaks are happening when the weather doesn't allow it, if students are in desks with masks off, where the desks are spaced 6 feet. But it would be a mask break, right? It would be a snack break. It would be in the lunchroom, mask comes off to eat and the mask goes back on. There's never been a standard of indoors for just general 6 feet or more, or 10 feet required for masks to be off for breaks or for eating.
Okay. Thanks.
So Erin, I didn't get an idea of where you want. I mean, if you don't have one, we can always come back to you, but.
Yeah. Let me think a little more.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. Caitlin?
So full disclosure, we all know that I can't really see the small print on these documents. So if I'm asking a question and it's in the tiny words, just let it go. I
We're
can't
gonna get
even,
you a screen reader until you're all healed up.
I literally am like this right now. But so if it's in the tiny words, just know I tried. Are we, so I guess I like the 3 weeks. I think that's a fair thing, and I'd be comfortable voting on that piece tonight. But I guess my concern is, are we tripping 2 metrics and not just 1? Like, we're over the 20 cases, so that's, you know, that one. But we're also, and I don't know if we're tripping it or just unclear about the 48-hour situation with testing in our area. So
I don't think we know at this point, right?
So
Yeah.
I think that requires additional time. So voting on the 3 weeks would give us time to figure that out too. Because
Yeah.
if Anna Jakes is just having an issue in like a very short-term situation, I don't want to make a big decision if it's a blip. Right. But if it's going to be an ongoing concern moving forward, then it's something I'd like to take into account. So it's kind of where I stand. I'm good at the 3 weeks, and I just want to keep monitoring the testing situation.
Yep.
And I think the 3 weeks would allow for us to do that in the same sense with cases.
Yeah.
But I'm open, and I'm not like married to my decision by any means. I just, where I sit right now is that. Not
Fair.
being able to see the tiny words, so I might be missing something.
Nope, I think you got it all. Yeah, and I should say, I mean, it could be convenient MD too, right? The only thing that they weren't doing previously was totally uninsured. They had already checked the box on Mass Health, which originally they hadn't been accepting that. They're doing minors. I mean, so it, you know, there's nothing that locks Anna Jakes to be the one test site. So
clarify,
look at all those
labs. So I guess the other, you're right, Anna Jakes might not be the issue, but the lab source situation and just getting it back.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just on that vein of a blip of an issue in the last week shouldn't be where we make kind of a big move for, you know, the Triton community as a whole. I want to be kind of careful and cautious for parents on that.
Yeah, I mean, one of my biggest fears here is that we're jumping in and out of models, right? And then it's just ends up being a horrible experience. Paul Goldner.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm not necessarily comfortable in voting on a new set of metrics tonight, but I agree in principle with the concept of looking at a couple of weeks of data before making a move. And I do think that codifying some metrics for Brian to make a short-term decision is important as well. And you know, the ones that are there seem reasonable, at least to have talked about tonight.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? So go ahead, Tina.
I was going to say, just listening to the discussion, I would feel more comfortable with the 3 weeks at the very least. I would like more time between having the original metrics shift us back into a model without being able to evaluate those things.
Okay. So having heard all those things, my suggestion would be we have a tentative meeting on the books on the schedule that, you know, again, we haven't always used our tentative meetings for the 18th, which would be 2 weeks from today. So my suggestion would then be to vote tonight to amend the original metrics to use 3 weeks of data when considering community spread. And then we can consider whatever we need to do, something new that also includes that, like, I don't even know what to call it, the essential personnel model. I don't know, you know, what that's called, but that that kind of, we have spread in our buildings, we need to take some quick action, that piece of it. And, you know, and an overall new metric at that meeting on the 18th. And that would also allow us to, that would be our 3 week mark. So that if, you know, cases continue to be above 20 for the next 2 weeks, which hopefully they won't, then, you know, we're taking a vote that night. And if they dip back down, then, you know, we're in good stead to stay in hybrid for a longer term. And again, to kind of reset that clock. Does that work for everybody? Anybody have concerns, complaints? Anything? All right, seeing, oh, Paul Mayette.
So would we be granting Brian that ability to make that 2 week call tonight? It seems to me that would be the first thing that we would want to move on, since that could happen between now and the 18th, whereas the 3 week piece would not really come into play until then. I guess we'd have to do it to get us till then, but it just seems to me that's the thing that is more likely to come up in the next 2 weeks as an issue.
It could, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I'm open, so.
I guess I would say this. So, you know, back on Friday, February 16th, I closed the school for 2 weeks. Thought that was just for 2 weeks, obviously it was a little longer. But so from a strictly authority standpoint, I'm able to do that. I likely wouldn't, you know, obviously if we're you know, approaching these metrics, because again, it's community is one thing, it's in the schools is totally different. I would likely take an approach on a school by school basis, in similar to what happened in Pentucket. They had a case over one weekend and then another one on the Monday. By Tuesday, they said, you know what, let's just shift the rest of this week, finish the week remote, let the tracers do their job. So I likely wouldn't just jump right to a 2-week. It would be that kind of similar situation. Let's get our hands completely around what this means. Specifically, if it's at the middle school or high school, we have students coming from 3 communities. Work with the tracers, work with Kristen Jolivet, get our hands around it. And if we're good, right, if we know where it went and where the tracing happened and we're comfortable, great. Then we shift back the following week. But I certainly I'm comfortable. I think I understand where every one of you are. And I don't think you would push back I think you trust me in that if there was, I thought that there was a serious possibility of spread within the school, I'm going to shut that down, right? I mean, there's no wisdom to say, yeah, let's just see how things go for a couple of weeks. So if you're comfortable with that, which I get the sense overall on the concept, that's the approach I would take. And maybe not jump right to 2 weeks automatically, but certainly react quickly to make sure everyone's safe.
And we can always meet in between. I mean, there's no reason we have to have a 48-hour notice, right? But I mean, there's no reason in 3 days we couldn't be meeting.
Yep, absolutely.
So, Caitlin?
Sorry. So to go back to Paul's point, there's no concern, like if Brian had to make a decision, we could technically meet within 3 days. So he wouldn't be like forced into like a corner making a broader decision. Like we're not putting him in a bad position.
Right. I mean,
Act
posting
without the
posting is always a tough call, right? But we can put an agenda together pretty quickly and could provide the backup annexes afterwards if we had to. I mean, it's a single item agenda. We're talking 10 minutes, right? Get that up, get that posted, and we're meeting in 3 days, provided that everybody's available for that, or at least a quorum of people are available to meet. So it's not a long process. We can, we can pull that together if we need to. If you were asking me, do we meet 6 hours? That's not going to work, right? But 3 days, I'm pretty sure we can get things together quickly.
Okay.
As soon as we find a date. So does that work with a bailout plan for Brian if he needs it? And
It's become all about me. I appreciate the support.
we're here for you. And just taking the original metric and changing it to use 3 weeks of data for now, and then considering either the new metric or some other amended version of it on the 18th, and scheduling that as a next meeting date, so that if we hit the 3 weeks, we have a meeting date set for that night to be able to take a vote. Does that work for everybody? Does that make sense? So the only thing I need tonight then is a motion to amend the original metric that was approved on September 3rd to use 3 weeks of weekly health report data to determine the community spread threshold instead of a single week.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
All right, Linda and Paul. I need a roll call vote. Erin?
Yes.
Thank you. Paul Goldner?
Yes.
Thank you. Maureen?
Yes.
Thank you. Caitlin?
Yes.
Thank you. Linda?
Yes.
Thank you. Paul Mayette?
Yes.
Thank you. Tina?
Yes.
Thank you. And I'm a yes as well. All right. So we'll come back to that, and we'll start working on an agenda for the 18th. Next item on the agenda is superintendent evaluation, the 2020-2021 goal setting.
So the ideal time to discuss my goals with you is 10:06 p.m. on a Wednesday evening.
Yeah.
You have these. I'm not going to read them to you. The bulk of the document is actually the rubric, which is a standardized rubric for superintendents. My goals, I will say, they're in the survive this year category. The student learning goal is is continually looking at the hybrid and fully remote models to make sure that we are doing the best that we can. Obviously, the survey speaks to that, but certainly throughout the year, as we're adapting, moving back and forth to make sure that regardless of the model that we are in, that we are providing the best possible overall learning experience for our students within the resources that we have. So in essence, that's the first goal, the student learning goal. The district or the professional practice goal is getting us back on track. We've been very much in a reactive mode, very much in survival mode since we closed in the spring, and a lot of things that were due to be discussed, whether that's school improvement plans or the district technology committee finished their work, or that working group finished a completely revised and revamped technology plan. The facilities assessment for the middle school, high school, all these things, the district strategy, all these things that had been kind of gaining momentum and steam, and then just everything came to a crashing halt. So making sure that by the end of this year, we have all those planning processes and those focus areas back on track and moving forward again in a very proactive rather than reactive way. And then the district improvement goal, really taking a look at the fiscal 22 budget process. We talked about this with the finance subcommittee. Very briefly, we can have a discussion with the district communication committee tomorrow night, just in regards to a very different process. So we're sitting here on November 4th, and we still don't have a finalized fiscal 21 budget and from the state. And so we are now looking forward to developing a new fiscal 22 budget and may not even have the data by then. So in the spirit of all the unknowns, revamping the budget process so that we're not asking principals and school councils to go through a rigorous process to talk about needs and priorities, when I can confidently say that we're going to be looking to make sure that we stay status quo, that we hope to maintain all the supports and services that we have now and not lose any. And certainly we'll come with priority areas and work as a leadership team, and so that we're not ignoring any needs for any, for certain. But I just, a rethinking of that process so that we arrive at a budget that is adequate. So in summary, those are my goals as proposed.
Thank you, Brian. Any questions for the superintendent on his goals? Maureen?
It's a simple question, I think. Brian, is it possible just to get a hard copy of this? Just in the past, it's been easier to kind of pick through it when I have a hard copy in my hand.
Of course, yeah.
Okay.
I'm assuming you mean the rubric, or do you want the 3 sheets, the whole thing?
The whole thing, yeah, just the whole document.
Yeah.
If that's all right.
Absolutely.
I'm happy to come pick that up if needed.
If anyone else would like a hard copy, please let me know. That was a very easy question. Thank you, Maureen.
That was. Any other questions or comments? Can I get a motion to approve the goals of the superintendent of schools for the 2020-2021 school year to be as presented?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
All right, thank you. Any discussion? All right, I need a roll call vote. Erin?
Yes.
Thank you. Paul Goldner?
Yes.
Thank you. Maureen?
Yes.
Thank you. Caitlin?
Yes.
Thank you. Linda?
Yes.
Thank you. Paul Mayette?
Yes.
Thank you. Tina?
Yes.
Thank you. And I'm a yes as well. All
Thank
right.
you.
Transition between learning models. So I think Brian already explained this quite well. Were there any comments or questions to come back to on this one?
Again,
Which document are you looking at? I'm sorry.
so it's
With
really-
the transition between learning models, it was actually in his superintendent's report.
So this is the concept of DESE's original guidance was a reasonable amount of time for families to shift. There wasn't any numbers. They then verbally said 2 to 3, eventually wrote down 3 to 4, and they've adjusted that to between 4 and 6 weeks is reasonable. So I'm asking that we adjust our plan that parents should expect up to 4 weeks. And if we can, we absolutely will. There'll be situations where we can transition a student the next day. And if that's possible, we will absolutely do that. But because of the dynamics, because of, as Kim was talking about, the larger class sizes, if it means we need to add a teacher to break up another section, that if there's large numbers, one is a piece of cake. When they rarely do things happen in singletons. So the request is to adjust the expected notification for parents, for families, from adjusting it from 2 weeks to 4 weeks.
Any questions or comments on this? And I will say I don't love this because I know when people want to move, they're going to want to move, but I think it's a necessary evil.
Mhm.
I don't, unfortunately, it just takes time.
Yep.
Um,
We'll really do everything we can to work with the family if there's an extenuating circumstance. So
can I get a motion to approve the increase in notice required by families to transition a student between learning models as proposed?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
That was Paul Goldner. Second. All right. Thank you. I need a roll call vote, please. Aaron?
Can we have discussion first?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Discussion.
On this, that's going to be like up to 4 weeks. And if we can do it sooner, then we'll do it sooner. Not that we're going to find out that someone is going to send an email in a week or two telling everybody that they get 4 weeks to make their decision. The school. What I'm saying is we're trying to make sure that we have ample time to allow for the transition.
Correct.
And right now it's phrased as 2 to 3 weeks.
2 weeks,
This
I
is
believe was what Brian's
2 weeks is what's listed in our plan.
2 weeks. Okay.
Yeah, Dusty had said 2 to 3 weeks. Now they're adjusting it 4 to 6. I'm suggesting
Okay.
4.
So you're suggesting 4, and that's up to 4 weeks to get them in, or up to 4 weeks before they'll have a decision and a date? I'm trying to get some clarity on that. Is it going to take the full 4 weeks in every case, or are we going to try and do it faster?
As I said, we will absolutely, I would say in many cases, be able to do it faster. But there will be several cases where, again, the example where if we have too many kids at a specific elementary classroom, it might mean hiring a new teacher. It might mean, right now it's, substitutes are not abundant. So if it took us 2 weeks to put another staff member in place and to be able to add to a class size or what have you, it would be, maybe it's 2 weeks, maybe it's 1 week, maybe it's the next day. But in some situations, it could take upwards of 4 weeks. So I think the assumption needs to be that it could take up to 4 weeks, that it would take to transition the student in, not on that fourth, right, the 28th day, we say, yep, we got you, we're good to go, we'll be transitioning in 2 weeks. And so it's 6 weeks total. No, within 4 weeks, we'd be able to make the transition.
Okay, so it'll take us up to 4 weeks to make the transition, not saying that it's going to take 4 weeks. I know it's semantics, but I just want to make sure that we have it worded in there appropriately so that we're not then quoting some family, it's going to take us 4 weeks, that it's actually going to take us up to 4 weeks.
Correct.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Any other discussion? All right. I need a roll call vote, please. Aaron?
Yes.
Paul Goldner?
Yes.
Maureen?
Yes.
Caitlin?
Yes.
Linda?
Yes.
Paul Mayette?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
Thank you. And I am a yes as well. All right. Moving on to subcommittee reports and action items, policy and advocacy. Linda.
Okay, we had a meeting this afternoon, sometime. You were given 30 policies to look at. So I would like to make a motion for us to approve the policies. We made some grammatical typo changes. So other than those grammatical changes, we'd like to have those policies approved.
As a first reading, right?
As a first reading. No, I think we've already done a first reading, correct? Brian?
No.
No, okay.
So I don't know, I'm going by the agenda.
For my records, I never had a first reading. They were waiting to come back as edited to the subcommittee. So yes, the subcommittee, it feels like we've talked about them 72 times, but for the full committee, this is the first reading.
Okay, a long, long time ago.
And just to confirm, these are all based off of updated MASC models.
Okay. So we'd like to approve as a first reading the policies.
Approved by the Policy and Advocacy Subcommittee in its meeting on November 4th.
Correct.
Are you making that motion?
I'm making the motion, yes.
Thank you. Can I get a
A
second?
second.
Was that Erin?
Yes.
Sorry, I totally lost your screen. Man. All right. Thank you.
Boy, that was painful.
Any
I'd
discussion?
also like to say that I had a conversation with Mr. Kelly, and because the high school students are using their cell phones, scanning barcodes for areas that they're for contact tracing, that we've put the cell phone policy on hold until we're back in full person, back in school.
Fully in person.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's
I'll
getting
just
late.
finish
It's
all your
getting tough.
sentences from now on. We're good.
You got
Any
my
further
back.
discussion? All right, I have a motion on the table and I need a roll call vote, please. Erin?
Yes.
Thank you. Paul Goldner?
Yes.
Thank you. Maureen?
Yes.
Thank you. Caitlin?
Yes.
Thank you. Linda?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you. Paul Mayette?
Yes.
Thank you. Tina?
Yes.
Thank you. And I am a yes as well. All right, that moves us on to finance. Caitlin?
I cannot read my own handwriting, so Brian, just jump in when I forget whatever it is
Got your back.
that I promised you I would say. So Kevin Mahoney, yeah, that is going to be talked about in executive session, but it's gone through and we'll clean it up over there. The big issue in finance subcommittee was Karen Denon, the district accountant, is leaving for Ohio. So it was brought to our attention from Brian and Kyle that she could work effectively and efficiently remotely from Ohio, and they would like us to, when it brought to the finance subcommittee, it seems like it will work out on all ends. So that is the recommendation from us. And
Yeah, and I don't think that's a formal, no formal action. It was
No.
more of an alert because we don't typically have employees working from Ohio. And it was one of those situations where had this topic come up 10 months ago in January, we would have said, my gosh, that could never work. But we know how well everything worked in the spring with people working fully remotely. And we all, and some of you, and especially the finance committee, know the value that Karen brings to the district. So it was kind of started as a joke of, yeah, you can just work remotely. And then it turned into, oh, wow, this could work. So we're going to move forward and, that with an agreement on her part that if at any point it doesn't work for her, or on our part, if it doesn't work for us, that we would go in a different way or in a different path. But she's here through the holidays. And then when she transitions out, we'll get her all the technology set up and phone out there. And so that literally rather than we'll dial her extension, it'll ring in Ohio rather than on her desk out in the front there. So just an alert for you that is not a typical arrangement, but something we're going to try out and see how it works. And we're confident it's going to work well. And then just to confirm, Kevin Mahoney is the proposed district treasurer.
oh yeah, sorry,
Just a guy.
just a guy. And Kyle promises there will be no more shakeups in that area for at least like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
We don't have it in writing, but he's verbally promised to leave that alone for just 2 weeks.
So moving on, personnel and negotiations, we're going to enter executive session next to go discuss, I think, everything that's been going on in PNN, but Maureen and Tina, I don't know if there's anything that you have to add before we move on.
No, we
No.
haven't met in,
I was just gonna say, it's all about executive sessions, so.
yeah.
All right. I'm gonna adjust the motion that's in the agenda slightly, because we didn't include, in the original motion, non-union personnel to discuss Kevin Mahoney's contract. So I'm adding that in, just so you know, so it's not gonna match what's in there. So can I get a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of planning for negotiations with union and non-union, union and non-union personnel to return to open session to confirm a memorandum of agreement with the TRTA units A and B and proposed district treasurer Kevin Mahoney, please.
I'll make that motion.
I'll
Thank you.
second it.
All right, thank you. Any discussion? All right, I need a roll call vote, please. Erin,
Yes.
Paul Goldner,
Yes.
Maureen,
Yes.
Caitlin,
Yes.
Linda,
Yes.
Paul Mayat,
Yes.
Tina,
Yes.
and I'm a yes as well. All right, thank you, and we'll go into executive session.
So I think because we're coming back to open session, we'll leave this meeting going, and then I'm gonna open up a breakout room. So I think 1, 2, 3,
Getting tricky here, Brian.
6, 7, 8, 9. I said I'm trying. There's not enough people. Getting tricky doesn't mean I'm getting tricky well. All right. So committee members, Kyle and Kim, you're going to get a invitation to join the breakout room. And then the recording will stay going. Kaylee, thank you very much.
Thanks, Kaylee. Have a good night. You're such a trooper.
I know. All right, so we'll give this a shot. When the prompt says join the room, please say yes. So it says Aaron did not join. Is Aaron frozen? Oh. Kim Croto not joined. All right, so there's no one else left here. There's a few. So all right, we are recording again.
All right.
Did we lose anyone?
I think we've got everybody. Yeah, we've got everybody. Okay. All right. So happy to report that the school committee personnel and negotiations subcommittee has negotiated memorandums of understanding with the teachers and the IAs. These are not a new contract. They are just to adjust working conditions to and expectations on working conditions to what's actually occurring here in hybrid and or in remote as well. So I need 2 motions to approve those memorandum, please. Can I get a motion first to confirm and approve memorandum of agreement with TRTA Unit A, please?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
All right, any discussion? I need a roll call vote, please. Erin,
Yes.
Paul Goldner,
Yes.
Maureen,
Yes.
Caitlin,
Yes.
Paulise. Oh, he's not here. Linda,
Yes.
Paul Mayat,
Yes.
Tina.
Yes.
Thank you, and I am a yes as well. And can I get a motion to confirm and approve a memorandum of agreement with TRTA Unit B, please?
I'll make that motion.
I'll
Thank you.
second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All right, I need a roll call vote, please. Erin,
Yes.
Paul Goldner,
Yes.
Maureen,
Yes.
Caitlin,
Yes.
Linda,
Yes.
Paul Mayette,
Yes.
Tina,
Yes.
and I'm a yes as well. Thank you for that. And those will be posted to the website for anyone that would like to look at the details. We have also negotiated a contract with Kevin Mahoney for a part-time district treasurer position, working 8 to 10 hours a week at an annual salary of $20,000, and he starts tomorrow. Can I get a motion to approve? Can I get a motion to approve the employment contract of the district treasurer for Kevin Mahoney, please?
I'll make the motion.
A second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All right, I need a roll call vote, please. Erin?
Yes.
Thank you. Paul Goldner,
Yes.
Maureen,
Yes.
Caitlin,
Yes.
Linda,
Yes.
Paul Mayette,
Yes.
Tina.
Yes.
Thank you, and I am a yes as well. So all three of those pass on a voice vote or on a roll call vote. So next meeting on the calendar or on the agenda was December 9th, but we'll be meeting in between on November 18th. I will have the updated version of the weekly report posted to the Stay Connected site tomorrow night. I believe I heard that they're actually moving the time release on that later in the day, so it'll probably be like late evening before it's available, from what I understand. I need a little extra time on that, so you can look for that when that goes up. And I think that's it. Can I get a motion to adjourn, please?
I'll make a motion.
Can I get a second, please?
I'll second.
I got a Maureen. Roll call, any discussion? A roll call vote, please. Erin,
Yes.
Paul Goldner,
Yes.
Maureen,
Yes.
Paulise,
Not here.
not here. Caitlin. There we go. I skipped Caitlin. Linda,
Yes.
Paul Mayette,
Yes.
Tina,
Yes.
and I'm a yes as well. Thank you, and I apologize for losing my roll calls.
For the record, Paul Lees has not been here for 4 hours and 6 minutes, so just checking.
The worst was I included Paul, but I skipped Caitlin because I knew I was supposed to skip somebody there.
Get some sleep.
Person. Ryan, can I tell you how much I failed on